Hi, everybody. Tonight, let us drift back through the winding corridors of time to an age when hope and hardship walked hand in hand beneath the shadow of high castle walls. This is the story of why healthcare in medieval times was so painfully brutal, an exploration not only of grim tools and crude remedies, but also of the fragile human spirit that clung to life against all odds. In these 22 parts, I shall guide you softly through centuries where illness lurked in every corner and a single cough could spell a family's ruin. So settle in, rest your eyes, and let us begin our slow descent into the candlelit chambers of medieval healing. Our story begins on a rain-soaked dawn in the year of our Lord 1347. The village of Wexcombe lies nestled in a shallow vale, its thatched roofs dripping with the mist that rolls in from the nearby marshes. Chickens wander freely along muddy paths, and the smell of damp straw lingers in the air. Inside a small cottage at the edge of the village, a mother sits at the bedside of her fevered son. His skin is hot to the touch, his breaths shallow and quick, eyes wide with a fear he cannot name. She dips a rag into a basin of water, its surface dark with floating herbs, and presses it to his brow. Outside, the village barber surgeon trudges up the path, his boots caked with earth. He carries with him a pouch of sharpened knives, a rusty saw, and a bundle of leeches writhing in a jar. He is not a learned man, no Latin flows from his tongue, yet he is healer, midwife, dentist, and executioner all in one. His remedies are crude but trusted, for there is no other hope here in Wexcombe, far from the learned halls of Salerno or Paris, where true physicians debate the humors by candlelight. The mother rises to greet him, eyes red from sleepless nights. She bows her head and whispers a prayer beneath her breath as he enters. The surgeon sets down his tools with a clatter that startles the chickens pecking by the door. He kneels beside the boy, places a calloused hand upon his chest, and listens to the rattle within. To him, the signs are clear. Bad blood must be drawn out if life is to remain. With little ceremony, he unwraps his blades. The boy's father holds his shoulders still as the surgeon nicks a vein in his arm. Dark blood trickles out, slow at first, then faster, dripping into a cracked clay bowl. The boy whimpers but does not scream. There is no strength left for that. The mother averts her eyes, her lips moving in a desperate litany of saints' names. This is the best they can do. They have no knowledge of germs, no grasp of infection. They believe sickness is an imbalance, a punishment, a miasma of foul air that creeps through damp cottages and lingers where the sun does not reach. Outside, the villagers gather in uneasy silence. They have seen this ritual many times: bloodletting, leeching, the burning of foul-smelling herbs to drive out evil spirits. Some swear by charms of rowan and garlic hung above the doors. Others whisper of witches in the woods who brew potions from nightshade and foxglove, offering forbidden cures for a secret price. And yet, death comes all the same, on swift feet or slow, unbothered by prayers and poultices alike. Beyond Wexcombe, in towns and cities, the story is no different. Great manors house the wealthy, but even they cannot buy true safety. A nobleman's physician may wear fine robes and quote Galen and Hippocrates, but his remedies often mirror the barber's crude cuts. He may prescribe purging, bleeding, or bitter draughts of mercury and arsenic, believing poison might balance poison. And still, when plague creeps through the gates, all stand equal in its path, lord and peasant alike. In the monasteries, monks copy ancient texts by flickering lamplight. They tend gardens of medicinal herbs, sage, rosemary, yarrow, carefully cataloged and pressed between vellum pages. To the common folk, these learned men are keepers of hidden wisdom. Yet much of what they know is guesswork wrapped in faith. They chant psalms over the sick, apply poultices of crushed mint and honey, and hope for God's mercy when knowledge fails. It is here, amid such uncertainty, that superstition takes root like ivy on a crumbling wall. If the barber's knife cannot cure, perhaps the touch of a saint's relic might. Pilgrims limp for miles to see fragments of bone encased in glass, to kneel before shrines heavy with the scent of beeswax and incense. They pin their hopes upon the faint chance of a miracle, a sudden remission, a fever broken in the night, a wound that heals clean instead of festering into rot. Yet miracles are few, and despair is common. For those who linger in sickness, there are other horrors to face. Should infection take hold, gangrene blackening a limb, abscesses swelling with foul pus, The surgeon's knife returns, this time to cut deeper. Amputation in these days is done without anesthetic. A leather strap between the teeth, a strong arm to hold the patient still, and a prayer that they do not bleed out on the dirt floor. If they survive, it is seen as a sign of God's grace. So as the dawn breaks over Wexcombe, the barber surgeon wipes his blade on his apron, leaving a streak of blood that will dry and flake by nightfall. The boy lies pale and still, a faint pulse flickering like a candle guttering in the wind. Outside, the village holds its breath, for in this place and this time, life hangs always by a thread, tender, trembling, and all too easily cut. And so our tale begins, dear listener, of blades and prayers, leeches and relics, of the fragile dance between life and death in an age when healing could wound as easily as it could save. Rest easy now, for in the next part, we shall follow the road beyond Wexcombe, to the great plague pits and gilded chambers of noble halls, where the same brutal truths of medieval medicine unfold beneath the watchful gaze of saints and shadows alike. Beyond the damp hedgerows of Wexcombe, the roads twist and turn through fields of barley and hedged orchards heavy with summer fruit. A slow train of carts moves along the rutted path, iron wheels squeaking beneath burlap-covered loads. Beneath these rough cloths lie bodies, some still warm, others long cold, gathered from cottages too small and airless to hold the sick and the dead at once. It is the summer of plague now, though they do not yet give it such a name. They call it pestilence, the Black Death, or simply God's wrath. The carts creak to a halt at the edge of a shallow pit, freshly dug in a meadow just beyond the churchyard walls. The pit yawns wide, an open mouth in the earth waiting to swallow the departed. No priest stands by with bell and book. The grave is too wide, the dead too many, and the living too fearful. A single gravedigger moves among the carts, his face swaddled in a rag soaked with vinegar, a poor talisman against the invisible threat that drifts like smoke on the breeze. His shovel scrapes against stone and clay as he murmurs prayers to saints whose names blur together in his weary mind. Beside the pit, a child watches. Her hair is tangled straw, her feet bare and muddy. She clutches a scrap of linen to her chest, her mother's apron, now all she has left of her. She does not cry, for the tears have dried up in the nights she spent alone on the cottage floor, listening to her mother's cough fade to silence. The gravedigger glances at her, but says nothing. He cannot take her in. He has his own children, and hunger already prowls at his door. When the last body slides from the cart into the pit, the gravedigger pauses, leaning on his shovel. His back aches, and in that ache lives the knowledge that he too may join the heap before the season turns. He drags a sodden blanket over the mound, muttering the Lord's Prayer under his breath, though the words feel thin and brittle in the face of so much decay. Meanwhile, beyond this humble burial ground, the same scene repeats itself in cities whose names echo across Europe: Florence, London, Paris, Bruges. There, the plague arrives on the backs of rats, hidden in the fur of black ships that drift into bustling ports. It spreads along trade routes, slipping through open gates and under doors left ajar on hot nights. Within weeks, entire quarters lie silent, but for the wails of the dying and the clatter of cartwheels on cobblestone. In these crowded towns, physicians in dark robes move like mournful birds. Some wear peculiar masks with long, beak-like noses stuffed with sweet-smelling herbs, rose petals, cloves, lavender, thought to purify the foul air that carries death. They stride through streets that reek of rot, holding canes to prod the sick without touching them. In their leather satchels, they carry scraps of parchment covered in Latin charms and packets of dried rue and wormwood. They speak of corrupted humors and bad alignments of stars, of corrupted vapors that must be banished with smoke and prayer. Inside the shuttered homes, families huddle together, their breath stale in the stifling dark. They hang posies of flowers in windows, sprinkle vinegar on doorsteps, and burn pungent herbs until the walls are yellow with soot. They do not know that their attempts cannot halt the invisible terror that multiplies in fleas and festers in swollen buboes beneath the skin. When the swellings appear, tender, purple-black lumps in the groin or under the arms, hope withers like frost-bitten vines. Some plead for the surgeon's blade to lance the boils, releasing poison into cloth that is buried deep in the earth. Others drink bitter draughts of ground emerald or powdered toad, desperate for any talisman against the inevitable. Within the monasteries, where learned monks pore over ancient texts, confusion reigns. They read Galen and Aristotle, their fingers tracing faded ink as they search for wisdom that might soothe a world gone mad. But the old books offer little more than theory. Imbalances of bile and phlegm, the wandering influence of planets. They write letters to distant abbeys, seeking counsel and promising prayers, yet even behind thick stone walls, the pestilence seeps in. Whole orders vanish within weeks, their libraries silent, but for the flutter of moths in neglected pages. In the manor houses, the lords and ladies fare no better. They flee the towns for country estates, bringing servants and provisions enough to bar the gates against the plague. Within candlelit chambers draped in embroidered cloth, physicians debate the merits of rosewater and unicorn horn. They bleed their noble charges with fine silver lancets, drain cups of blood into porcelain bowls painted with saints and angels. They burn fragrant woods and scatter crushed pearls into wine, imagining they can buy immunity with luxury. Yet still the fever comes, creeping past velvet curtains and perfumed tapestries, humbling the highborn as it does the lowest serf. Amidst this terror, rumors take on a life of their own. Some say the plague is a punishment for sin, a flood of pestilence instead of water, sweeping filth from the world. Others whisper that witches gather at night to brew storms and sickness in secret cauldrons. In some towns, mobs rise up, hunting those accused of dark magic or foreign plots, seeking someone to blame when no cure can be found. Fires burn in village squares as suspected witches plead their innocence to deaf ears and hungry flames. Yet, for every act of fear and cruelty, there are moments of stubborn mercy. Friars risk their lives to carry food to the sick, though many do not return. Mothers cradle dying children with gentle hands, knowing they may soon join them. A neighbor leaves bread at a doorstep and vanishes before dawn, a silent act of kindness in a world where the touch of a hand can carry death. As the plague pit fills, as the gravedigger shovels earth over the faceless dead, life clings stubbornly to its fragile thread. Even here, among the stink of rot and the tolling of church bells, children laugh in fleeting moments, lovers whisper in shadowed corners, and prayers rise like smoke into indifferent skies. This, too, is part of the brutal story of medieval medicine. A story not only of blades and leeches, but of faith and fear, of tenderness hidden within the darkest nights. In the next part of our journey, we shall pass through the doors of a medieval infirmary, where monks in rough woolen robes tend the sick and dying by flickering candlelight. We shall see how faith and knowledge intertwined, and how hope flickered stubbornly amidst the damp stone walls, even when true healing lay far beyond their reach. Far from the crowded plague pits and the bustling streets of cities, there stand the silent walls of a medieval infirmary, humble yet holy places, where faith and healing attempt a fragile dance. These sanctuaries of the sick are found within the folds of monasteries and abbeys, stone-built enclaves surrounded by herb gardens and sheltered cloisters. Here, amid the hush of whispered prayers and the scratch of quills on parchment, monks and nuns carry out their solemn duty to mend the broken, soothe the fevered, and ease the final breaths of those beyond saving. It is early morning, and the first light of dawn steals through narrow windows of stained glass, painting flickers of red and gold across the worn flagstone floors. Brother Anselm moves softly between the pallet beds that line the infirmary's long hall. His habit brushes against rough linen sheets as he bends to check the brow of a sleeping man, an old farmer who arrived days ago, coughing blood into a soiled rag. Brother Anselm's touch is gentle, his fingers cool against the heat that radiates from the man's skin. The air here is thick with the mingled scents of beeswax, lavender, and the acrid tang of vinegar. Herbs hang in bunches from the rafters, rosemary to ward off evil vapors, sage to settle a churning stomach, and rue to cleanse the foul humors that poison the blood. Along a low wooden table, earthenware bowls hold pastes and potions, pounded garlic and honey for wounds, infusions of mint and fennel for cramps, slivers of licorice root steeped in hot water for coughs that tear at the chest. In one corner, Sister Elsworth kneels beside a boy no older than 12. His arm is wrapped in linen stained dark with blood and pus. She lifts the cloth and winces at the angry wound beneath, a jagged gash that will not close, festering despite poultices of mashed onion and wine. She murmurs a hymn beneath her breath, steadying her hands as she sprinkles powdered myrrh into the open flesh. There is no laudanum here to dull the pain, no sterile blade to cut away what is lost. She does what she can with what the Abbey garden provides and the prayers she threads through her fingers like rosary beads. Outside the infirmary's stout oak door lies the physic garden, a small, ordered patch of earth teeming with green life. Raised beds overflow with marigold and comfrey, betony and hyssop. Monks and lay brothers bend their backs to the soil, their robes dusted with pollen and loam. They know each plant by name and virtue, passing their wisdom from one generation to the next like a fragile flame. In battered leather-bound books, they copy old recipes, salves for burns, teas for fevers, plasters for boils. Some of these recipes work in small ways, many do not. But hope is a stubborn thing, rooted deeper than any herb. Beyond the garden walls, the world remains harsh and uncertain. The infirmary's patients are peasants and pilgrims alike, beggars from the roadside and noblemen who have cast aside their finery in desperation. All who come are received with the same gentle rites: a bed of straw or wool, a clean cup of water, a whispered blessing. For the monks and nuns who tend to them, this is their sacred calling: to soothe a brow, to wash foul wounds, to close the eyes of the dying, and guide their souls with soft Latin chants. In the stillness of night, when the oil lamps flicker low, the infirmary breathes like a living thing. The rasp of labored breath echoes in the rafters, mingled with the rustle of robes as healers pass from bed to bed. Rats scurry along the walls, drawn to crumbs and spilled broth, but they are merely another shadow in a place already steeped in sorrow and resilience. Brother Anselm pauses at the foot of an old woman's bed. She lies half-covered by a patched wool blanket, her hands folded neatly on her chest. Her eyes are closed now, her final sigh drifting past cracked lips as gently as a breeze through the cloister's arches. He crosses himself, murmurs the prayers of passing, and lights a taper at the shrine of St. Roch, patron of plague victims and the desperate sick. Tomorrow he will help carry her to the graveyard behind the abbey walls, where simple wooden crosses stand among wildflowers and untrimmed grass. Yet for each soul that leaves, another arrives at the door. A traveler bitten by a mangy dog, fearing rabies more than death itself. A newborn cradled in a mother's arms, its breath thin and fluttering like a dying moth. A night squire with a festering wound that stinks of iron and decay. Each one brings a fresh reminder that sickness knows no rank, no season, no mercy. By candlelight, the monks copy letters to distant scholars, seeking new cures, new secrets hidden in the words of Greeks and Arabs long dead. Some parchments arrive from the great universities, Salerno, Montpellier, filled with complicated diagrams of organs drawn from memory more than from sight. They speak of humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. That must be balanced with leeches, emetics, and cold compresses of vinegar and rosewater. Yet for all the knowledge they gather, disease slips through their fingers like smoke, answering to no rule but its own. Still, the infirmary endures. Stone walls shelter the frail, humble beds, cradle the fevered. The monks and sisters walk these halls year after year, burying their failures beneath wooden crosses and clinging to each small success like a candle against the dark. In this fragile haven, where suffering mingles with whispered prayers, medieval medicine shows its gentlest face. A face lined with fatigue, lit by faith, and never truly free of the shadows that gather when night falls. In the next part of our wandering tale, we shall leave these quiet walls and follow the footsteps of traveling healers, wandering bone setters, cunning folk, and hedge witches, who roam the forests and village lanes, offering remedies born not of books, but of whispered lore and secrets carried on the wind. Beyond the sturdy walls of monasteries and the flickering lamps of humble infirmaries, there roams another kind of healer. Figures who wander the winding lanes and shadowed forests, their knowledge not penned in learned tomes, but carried in calloused hands and whispered from mother to daughter, father to son. They are the bone setters, the cunning folk, the hedge witches, keepers of old ways, moving from village to village like drifting smoke, feared and needed in equal measure. In a small clearing at the edge of Brackenholt Wood, an old woman crouches beside a young man whose leg lies twisted at an unnatural angle. He fell from his horse that afternoon, the brute startled by a fox darting through the underbrush. The villagers who carried him here know better than to drag him to the distant abbey. They need quick help, and so they came to Mistress Etta, who has mended more broken limbs than any learned surgeon in the nearest town. She works without ceremony, her hair a tangle of gray beneath a woolen hood. Around her neck hangs a pouch of dried bones and tiny cloth sachets, filled with marigold, comfrey, and yarrow, plants she plucks from ditches and forest edges when the moon is right. She hums low as she runs her gnarled fingers along the boy's shin, feeling for the jagged edges beneath swollen skin. His face is slick with sweat, his teeth grit against the splintered agony of bone grinding on bone. With strong, practiced motions, Mistress Etta binds strips of willow bark soaked in warm ale along the leg. She mutters words that are neither Latin nor the prayers of priests, but old words, born of hedge and hollow, half blessing, half charm. She pulls, and there is a sickening crack as the bone slides back into place. The boy screams once and then falls silent, the shock sending him drifting into uneasy sleep. Ida's neighbors watch from a cautious circle, clutching charms of iron and rowan, for while they trust her hands, they fear the unseen powers that might linger in the shadows of her hut. By the glow of a small fire, Ida grinds comfrey root with a pestle worn smooth by decades of use. She mixes it with sheep's tallow, smearing the paste over rough splints of hazel. This poultice, she knows, will soothe the swelling and coax the bone to knit, if God wills it and the boy keeps still long enough to heal. She ties the splints tight, her fingers deft, her voice a murmur of instructions for the boy's mother. Change the poultice each dawn and dusk, burn dried rosemary by his bedside to keep fever at bay, and do not let him stand before the first snow falls. Far from Ida's clearing, other healers roam lonely roads and market greens. Some carry small chests of simple tools, knives honed on river stones, saws for bad breaks that will not mend, tweezers for pulling thorns buried deep in a farmer's calloused palm. They are bone setters and tooth pullers, their craft born not of university lectures, but of trial and error, of generations who learned by watching limbs break and mend again under patient hands. In bustling villages, cunning men sell charms for a fair price. Scraps of parchment inked with symbols meant to ward off the evil eye, tiny bags of salt and wormwood to hang above a cradle where sickness might creep in with the night air. Some offer love potions, powders ground from dried herbs, and whispered secrets, promising a girl's smile in exchange for a silver penny. Others brew bitter teas for mothers who bleed too long after childbirth, or for girls whose bellies swell in secret, far from the priest's knowing gaze. These folk healers live always on the cusp of trust and suspicion. By daylight, villagers bless their skill when a cow's milk runs clean again or a babe's fever breaks. By dusk, those same villagers speak in hushed tones of devil's bargains and forest pacts, afraid that the same hands that heal might just as easily curse. A failed remedy, a child who does not recover, a sudden storm that flattens the barley fields. Such things breed rumor like mushrooms in damp earth. And when famine bites or pestilence strikes too hard, it is often these wandering souls who find themselves bound and dragged before the manor lord or the village priest, forced to answer for sins they never confessed to committing. Yet still they walk the lanes, for without them, many would face pain with no solace at all. Not every village boasts a learned doctor or a monk's gentle touch. Not every hamlet lies within a day's ride of a monastery's walls. In these wild pockets between hedge and forest, the hedge witch's salve and the bone setter's splint are all that stand between a child's infected cut and the grave. There are stories, too, that drift on the wind like embers, of healers who know the secret places where foxglove grows tall, its purple bells hiding poison and cure alike. Of men who slip into moonlit meadows to gather mandrake roots, whose pale, knotted shapes are said to scream when pulled from the earth. Of women who keep bees not only for honey, but for venom, which they milk carefully from a sting to mix into salves for aching joints and swelling flesh. The church watches them with wary eyes, torn between condemnation and grudging acceptance. Some priests denounce them from the pulpit, calling their charms pagan relics, best left to the darkness. Others quietly send for their help when Latin prayers and relics fail to drive sickness away. It is a dance of fear and need, suspicion and gratitude, a fragile bargain that holds only as long as the harvest is good and the graveyard quiet. So it is that in the deepest folds of medieval life, where learned physicians are but a rumor and the plague a whisper in the wind, these wandering healers persist. They mend what they can, ease pain where they may, and slip away before dawn with no promise but the echo of an old rhyme whispered through the hedgerows, that sometimes the wildest knowledge hides where no church bell can reach. In our next quiet passage, we shall step from forest paths to the stone chambers of castle keeps and noble manors, where the rich and powerful summon their own physicians, men cloaked in velvet and learned in ancient tongues, who promise cures wrapped in gold, yet wield the same crude knives and poisons as the humblest hedge witch beneath the greenwood boughs. Within the cold embrace of castle walls and noble manors, medicine wears a different face, one adorned in silks and Latin phrases, where learned men debate beneath tapestries and flickering torches. Here, amid the heavy scent of beeswax candles and the faint perfume of drying roses, the rich cling to the promise that knowledge and coin might hold death at bay, even as the same shadows that haunt the peasant's cottage slip beneath carved doors of oak and iron. Sir Aldwin of Hawkenridge lies upon a great bed draped in ermine and linen spun fine as cobweb. Tall windows stand open to the night, though the chill air carries with it the damp breath of autumn's creeping rot. Beside him, a physician stands, a man of slight frame and sharp eyes, clad in a robe dyed deep burgundy, a thin gold chain about his neck to mark his station above common healers and wandering charlatans. His name is Master Gerard, trained at Montpellier, versed in the tongue of Galen and Avicenna, yet bound to the same limits that tether all who claim the art of healing in this age. He leans close, pressing pale fingers to Sir Aldwin's wrist, feeling the sluggish pulse beneath skin turned waxen with fever. On a nearby table, a scattering of glass vials catches the firelight, quicksilver and vinegar, oil of roses, a sliver of bezoar stone prized from the belly of a goat in faraway Persia, each believed to hold some measure of salvation. Beside them sits a small brazier, coals glowing red as blood. Master Gerard lifts a slender iron rod from its heart, its tip searing bright. He waves it gently to cool before placing it upon a cloth soaked in rosewater. "My lord must be purged of foul humors," he murmurs to the lady of the house, who stands wringing a kerchief between trembling hands. Her eyes dart to the rod, then to her husband's hollow cheeks. She nods. For what else is there to do? Coin has been paid, prayers whispered, relics kissed. Now there is only this. Servants stand ready with bowls and towels. Gerard sets to work. With a practiced hand, he selects a slender silver lancet, its blade honed to a wicked point. He leans over Sir Aldwin, who stirs and moans, caught between fever dreams and the cold reality of what is to come. With a swift cut to the arm, dark blood wells up, sluggish and sticky. A servant holds a basin to catch the flow. They will bleed him just enough, so they say, to draw the sickness out, to restore balance among the four humors that churn unseen within every man's breast. When the bleeding is done, Gerard wipes the blade on a strip of linen, then reaches for a small jar of ground pearls and dried rose petals. He mixes this with wine and a pinch of powdered emerald, precious stones crushed at great expense, believed to break the poison that courses through noble veins. Sir Aldwin swallows the bitter draught with a shudder, his lips stained green from the crushed gem. Outside the chamber, the castle murmurs with hushed footsteps and distant echoes of servants carrying word to and fro. In the kitchens, cooks prepare delicate broths of partridge and sage, for it is believed that the strength of noble flesh must be fed, even when the stomach rebels. A maid is sent to the chapel to light candles before the relic of St. Erasmus, whose mummified finger rests beneath glass, brought back from a crusader's distant pilgrimage. A relic, they hope, that might draw God's mercy closer to this cold room where science and faith intertwine like ivy on old stone. Yet for all the wealth and learning gathered here, the tools are not so far removed from the barber's pouch in Wexcombe or the bonesetter's kit in Brackenholt Wood. When a wound festers, the knife still must cut. When fever rages, the blood still must flow. The difference lies only in the trappings, in the gold thread on the physician's robe, the Latin that drips from his tongue, the soft furs laid beneath the sick bed. Master Gerard watches as Sir Aldwin slips again into restless sleep, his breath rasping like parchment torn in an autumn wind. Gerard feels the weight of his own helplessness pressing against his ribs. He has studied the writings of Hippocrates and Galen, translated the dusty works of Avicenna by candlelight in a stone hall far from this place. He knows the humors in theory: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, delicate as glass, easily unbalanced by hot winds, cold draughts, a meal too rich, or a thought too dark. Yet when faced with flesh that burns and bloats and rots, he holds no secret that can halt the slow march of decay. In the Lady's Solar, she kneels before a small altar, whispering fervent prayers as her maids hover nearby. She sends a boy on horseback to summon another priest, another relic, another promise of divine favor. Below, in the castle's lower halls, servants gather in knots to trade hushed rumors. Some swear the Lord has been cursed, that an old feud with a neighboring baron has brought a witch's hex upon the house. Others mutter that the new physician has brought foreign poisons in his bag, that a simpler village healer would know better how to bleed and bind. As dusk folds itself around the keep's thick walls, the shadows gather. Within Sir Aldwin's chamber, Master Gerard wipes his tools with vinegar, prays beneath his breath for the tinctures to work, for the stones to draw the poison from marrow and blood alike. He has seen noblemen rise from worse. He has seen them vanish into cold stone tombs all the same. When dawn comes, he will weigh the humors once more, peer into the Lord's sunken eyes, and choose whether to bleed him again, to purge him with stronger draughts, or to surrender the fight altogether. In this chamber of silks and Latin prayers, medieval medicine shows its most gilded mask, polished and learned, yet no less brutal than the rough hand that sets a broken leg beneath a hedgerow's thorny boughs. It is a truth that echoes softly in the hush of these stone walls, that no matter how rich the bed, how fine the robe, the knife and the fever make beggars of lords and kings alike. In the part to come, we shall travel beyond the castles and manor halls to the hidden corners of city life, where apothecaries grind powders in shadowed shops, where quacks cry miracle cures in muddy streets, and where the line between cure and poison blurs with each desperate coin dropped into a waiting palm. In the narrow, crooked streets of medieval cities, where timbered houses lean close enough to whisper secrets from one sagging beam to the next, another layer of healing and deception thrives beneath the constant clatter of carts and the murmur of passing feet. Here, amid the press of merchants, beggars, pilgrims, and thieves, the apothecary's shop and the quack's stall stand side by side, each promising relief in a world where true cures are as scarce as gold. Down a lane slick with mud and the refuse of butchered animals, a painted sign swings above a low door, a mortar and pestle carved in relief, its edges softened by decades of rain. Within, the air is thick with mingled scents, sharp vinegar, earthy dried roots, the sweet rot of crushed berries left too long in their jars. Shelves sag beneath glazed ceramic pots and stoppered glass flasks. Bundles of dried lavender and rosemary hang from beams blackened by years of tallow smoke. This is the realm of Master Lucian, an apothecary whose reputation teeters always between respect and suspicion. Behind his worn counter, Master Lucian grinds dried foxglove leaves into a fine, bitter powder. He works with measured care, mindful that a pinch too much might stop a man's heart as surely as a blade. His apprentice, a boy named Henri with ink stains on his sleeves, fetches vials of rose oil and camphor, setting them neatly in a row as Lucien mutters the virtues of each, one to soothe the lungs, the other to ease swelling and chill fevers that burn too hot. A woman enters, her face veiled, her eyes darting to the shadowed corners where herbs dangle like trophies. She places a few coins on the counter and speaks in a hush of her sleepless nights, her cough that rattles like pebbles in a jar. Lucien listens, nods, selects a mixture of dried thyme, licorice root, and a few shavings of horehound, wrapping them in waxed parchment. He gives her a cordial, thick and sweet to soothe her throat. She does not ask what else might be in the bottle, whether the drop of laudanum mixed within will help her sleep or draw her further from waking altogether. In this city, trust is a coin like any other, spent easily and often wasted. Not far from Lucien's shop, beneath the spire of the parish church, a different healer plies his trade in full view of the passing crowd. His name is Thomas Albright, though most know him only as a street quack, a man of loud voice and louder promises. From atop a makeshift cart, he proclaims his potions to a restless crowd, waving a tin flask as though it holds salvation itself. Painted boards at his feet declare cures for gout, ague, boils, and bad humors. He swears by secret recipes brought back from the Holy Land, though the truth is, they are little more than spirits spiked with pennyroyal, wormwood, and whatever else might tingle the tongue and stir a fool's hope. Children dart between legs to snatch a dropped coin, while mothers clutch infants wrapped in rags, desperate enough to believe a single silver penny might buy them a season more of breath. Thomas winks at them all, tipping his battered hat, his voice ringing off the stone walls. Good folk, no learned scholar can match what I bring from the corners of the world. One sip, and no pestilence shall linger, no plague shall strike your humble house. A man in the crowd, gaunt and hollow-eyed, shuffles forward. He lays down his last coin and takes the flask with trembling hands. He will drink it that night, feel the warmth spread through his veins, and for a moment he will believe himself mended, until dawn comes and the sickness remains, patient and unmoved. City guards pass by and eye Thomas with weary disdain, but no law yet forbids him. The church grumbles that such men peddle false hope, yet does not deny that sometimes the poor need illusions as much as bread. And if a man dies after drinking Thomas's miracle, who is to say the plague or the will of God was not the true hand behind it? Meanwhile, deeper within the city's winding alleys, secret transactions slip from shadow to shadow. In a back room behind a tanner's yard, a woman named Agnes brews concoctions that no apothecary would sell openly. Her remedies are for mothers whose bellies swell when they should not, for girls who fear a child they cannot feed. She crushes tansy and pennyroyal, mixes them into dark, bitter draughts that promise to undo what nature has begun. Her work is dangerous. More than once, a girl has not risen from Agnes's straw pallet. But for some, the risk is better than the ruin of scandal and starvation. When the church learns of her craft, the whispers grow sharp as knives. Yet for every door that bars her out, 2 more women knock softly in the night. Above all these secret cures and loud deceptions looms the unseen specter of true knowledge. Books locked in the chests of university men, scrolls penned in distant lands where Arab and Jewish scholars write of distillation, isolation of poisons, strange plants yet unknown in these cold northern streets. A few learned apothecaries hoard such wisdom greedily, mixing the new with the old, a pinch of Galen, a measure of Avicenna, a scrap of rumor brought by a sailor from Venice or Alexandria. It is a fragile web of half-truths and guesses, spun into powders that might heal as easily as they might harm. As dusk drapes its gray veil over the city, Master Lucian shutters his door and checks the lock twice, knowing that thieves might find gold not in coins, but in the tiny vials he keeps hidden beneath floorboards. Thomas Albright folds his painted boards, pockets his day's coins, and vanishes into the maze of taverns where no one will question the weight of his purse or the lies on his tongue. And Agnes sits in her hidden room, her fingers stained green with crushed leaves, her eyes watchful for a knock that could mean another desperate girl, or the priest's men come to drag her away by torchlight. In the city's heart, the line between cure and curse, hope and deceit, blurs with every footstep that echoes along the cobblestones. In this cramped labyrinth of timber and shadow, medieval medicine shows its most mercurial face, a shifting mask of half-knowledge and blind faith, of secrets traded like silver beneath the watchful eyes of saints carved in stone. In the next part of our wandering tale, we shall travel beyond city gates and crumbling walls, venturing into battlefields where crude surgery meets the clash of iron, where the wounds of war reveal just how brutal the art of healing could be when men lay broken under the open sky. Beyond the city's tangled lanes and the cloistered hush of monasteries, another theater of healing sprawls wide beneath the indifferent sky. The battlefield, where steel and flesh in screams and thunder. Here, under banners snapping in a cold wind and the relentless drone of war drums, medicine shows its rawest face, stripped of gilded words and gentle prayers, reduced to iron, fire, and the brutal mercy of the surgeon's knife. It is the year of our Lord 1415, and the fields near Agincourt lie sodden with rain and churned earth. Beneath the gray dawn, English archers stand ankle-deep in mud, their longbows strung tight with wax string, arrows ready to fly like a storm of thorns. Opposite them, French knights gleam in polished plate and gilded crests, a tide of banners that flutter bright against the gloom. When the horns call and the arrows hiss, men fall like wheat beneath a scythe, torn open by iron that knows no master but chance. When the clash begins, so too does the work of the surgeons. Behind the shifting line of battle, makeshift tents flap in the wind, little more than canvas draped over poles driven into sodden ground. Within, a table stained dark with old blood waits for the wounded who stumble or are dragged from the fray. There are no silken pillows here, no prayers in hushed Latin. Only the raw stench of sweat and iron, the metallic reek of blood that never truly leaves the air. Master Reynard, a battlefield barber surgeon, stands ready with sleeves rolled to the elbow, his apron stiff with old gore. His tools, bone saws, knives, hooks, rest in a leather roll at his feet, each blade wiped clean but never clean enough. A boy, barely 12, works at his side, stoking a brazier that flickers low and hungry. The coals meant to heat irons that will cauterize wounds when stitching fails. The first man through the flap is a young archer, an arrow shaft protruding from the soft meat of his thigh. He bites on a strip of leather as Reynard feels for the barbed head beneath torn flesh. There are no numbing draughts here, only the quick prayer that shock will steal the worst of the agony. With steady hands, Reynard cuts the shaft clean, then drives a slender hook in deep to find the steel tip lodged near the bone. The archer's scream is lost amid the clash of swords outside, his sweat dripping onto the surgeon's sleeves. When the arrow is out, Reynard presses a poultice of moss and wine-soaked linen to the wound, then binds it tight with strips of rough linen. The boy hands him a hot iron, its tip glowing dull red. The hiss of burning flesh rises into the cold air, met with a fresh cry that fades quickly as the archer slips into fevered unconsciousness. Not all wounds are so simple. Another man arrives borne on a shield, his leg crushed by a knight's hammer. The bone juts pale through torn hose and bloodied skin. Reynard does not waste words. He knows the limb must go or rot will claim the man by nightfall. The boy fetches the saw, its teeth freshly filed. The man, half delirious with pain, mutters a prayer to St. George. Two squires pin his arms and shoulders. Reynard draws the saw across flesh and bone in a sawing rhythm, each pull tearing screams from the man's throat until shock blesses him with silence. The stump is cauterized with the same iron that sealed the archer's thigh. The smell of burning fat hangs heavy in the tent, clinging to every breath. Outside, the battle surges and retreats, a tide of iron and mud. Wounded men crawl through the mire toward Reynard's tent, dragging themselves on elbows slick with blood. Some do not make it. They fall where they lie, mouths open to the sky that cares nothing for their dying prayers. Others are carried by comrades who know well that a blade's mercy may yet be kinder than infection's slow poison. Between the groans and the hiss of heated irons, Reynard's mind drifts to lessons learned long ago in the back room of a London barber's shop. How to set a bone with a splint of ash wood, how to pack a wound with honey to ward off the stink of rot, how to close torn flesh with gut thread, boiled soft in wine. There are no libraries here, no time for the humors or the moon's sway over bile and blood. On the battlefield, medicine is raw necessity. If it staunches the bleeding, binds the break, sears the poison from the flesh, then it is enough. Yet even amid this crude art, small acts of care bloom like wildflowers in trampled soil. Reynard spares a drop of wine for the lips of the dying, murmurs a quiet word to those whose eyes fix on something only they can see. The boy who stokes his fire wipes sweat from a wounded man's brow with a rough but gentle hand. A priest kneels in the mud beside the tent, whispering absolution to souls slipping free before the surgeon's blade can claim them first. When dusk settles over Agincourt's torn fields, the tents stand ragged but defiant. Piles of severed limbs lie heaped near trenches hastily dug to hold them. Smoke drifts upward from smoldering braziers, carrying the scent of scorched iron and burnt flesh into a sky heavy with the threat of rain. The living sleep fitful on blankets soaked with their own blood, dreaming uneasy dreams of swords and arrows and the surgeon's knife. In this place of iron and agony, the healer's art is neither gentle nor hidden. It is raw survival, each stitch and searing brand a desperate plea against the cold indifference of infection and decay. It is here, More than anywhere, that medieval medicine shows its most brutal edge. A fight not for comfort, but for a chance. Just a chance to stand once more when dawn breaks. And so, in the next part of our journey, we shall leave these fields of mud and steel and follow the stories carried home, wounded soldiers returning to villages and hearths, where crude battlefield care gives way to slow recovery, and the scars of war remind all who see them how thin the veil of survival truly is. When the clash of steel has faded into the moaning hush of the aftermath, when banners are lowered and the battlefield lies strewn with broken helms and splintered shields, the wounded make their slow pilgrimage homeward, those fortunate enough to stand or to be carried by friends whose own wounds are less cruel. Thus begins another chapter in the tale of medieval healing, one no less brutal for its quiet, the long, uncertain tending of war's survivors in hearth-lit cottages and humble village halls. In the hamlet of Stonethorpe, the people wait for their sons and fathers to return from the far fields of Agincourt. Word of the victory arrives before the men themselves, a passing rider shouting triumph and spoils as he gallops through muddy lanes. But behind him, trudging slow and bent beneath the weight of torn flesh and splintered bone, come the real harvest of that distant clash. Young Thomas, once a broad-shouldered plowman turned archer, now limps through the village gate on a crutch roughly hewn from an ash branch. His right leg ends in a rag-wrapped stump, the work of Renard's saw beneath the surgeon's tent. Each step sends a tremor of agony through his frame, but his eyes stay fixed on the squat cottage where his mother waits, a thin curl of smoke rising from the hearth within. Inside, his mother, Mistress Alice, has prepared all she can: linens boiled in a cauldron, clean straw spread beneath the rough pallet, a pot of weak ale to dull the ache if the saints see fit. She is no healer trained in Latin or herb lore, but she knows what her mother knew before her: how to steep dried marigold in warm wine to wash a wound, how to boil honey and resin into a sticky salve that keeps rot at bay, how to whisper the names of saints over fevered lips in the dark hours when all else fails. Thomas lies on his pallet near the hearth, the stump of his leg elevated on a folded wool cloak. Alice peels away the soiled cloth, eyes narrowing at the angry red that rims the cut flesh. She knows too well the smell that means death creeping inward, foul and sweet at once. She breathes a prayer and sets to work, washing the stump with water drawn from the well at dawn and steeped with vinegar and rosemary. She presses honey thick as pitch into the wound, wraps it tight, then kneels by her son's head to feed him a draught of ale laced with poppy syrup. His eyes flutter closed, though in his sleep he mutters of arrows and the endless rain that turned fields to graveyards of mud. Outside the cottage, the neighbors come and go, bearing small gifts: a crust of bread, a handful of herbs, a haunch of salted pork for when the boy finds the strength to eat. They share tales of other men returning home, some with broken arms set by battlefield surgeons, splinted with strips of willow and left to knit crookedly if they knit at all. Others with festering cuts that must be lanced again and again, the foul pus scraped away with knives passed from hand to hand and rinsed only in cold well water. Some soldiers do not return to hearth and bed, but to the low stone hall of the village church, laid upon wooden benches where the parish priest tends their wounds as best he knows. Father Oswin is no surgeon, but he knows how to pray, how to warm a thin broth of nettles and leeks to coax strength into shivering limbs, how to lay cool cloths across burning brows when infection takes root. He chants psalms while he works, believing each word a barrier against the rot that so often slips past mortal skill. In the hush of those stone walls, a man named Walter lies with his arm bound tight to his chest. It was shattered beneath a knight's mace, the bone split like firewood. The surgeon who saw him on the field declared the limb doomed, but Walter begged with tears streaming through mud-caked whiskers, for the knife to be stayed. Now he lies in Stonethorpe's chapel, the arm crooked and useless, but still his own. His wife comes each dusk to wash him, to spoon thin soup past cracked lips. Whether the rot will come for the dead bone within, none can yet say. At night, when the hearth's last embers glow and Thomas's breathing slows into a ragged sleep, Mistress Alice sits by his side and watches shadows creep along the rough beams of the roof. She wonders how many more nights she will keep this vigil, How many more dawns she will peel back the linen to search for fresh redness, for the creeping black that means the surgeon's knife must return, or the grave must open its waiting mouth. In the next cottage over, a mother weeps over a son whose fever took him quietly in the dark, the stump of his arm leaking foulness no herb could halt. In another, a man learns to walk with a crutch, to grip a hoe in his left hand instead of his right. Some who return wounded will never work the fields again, their families forced to share thin harvests, with mouths that can no longer pull a plow or swing an axe. War's price, paid not only in blood spilled beneath foreign banners, but in the slow, grinding poverty that lingers long after the swords are sheathed. Yet even here, in these dark corners of recovery, there flickers a stubborn ember of care. A mother's steady hand, a neighbor's whispered prayer, a priest's quiet vigil, each one a small defiance against the cruelty of wounds that will not heal clean. In this fragile tending, medieval medicine shows its most human face, flawed, fumbling, often futile, yet driven by the simple, enduring wish to hold death back, if only for another night. In the next quiet chapter, we shall step deeper into the hidden places of medieval life, into the cold chambers where those deemed mad or possessed find themselves chained and bled in the name of healing, where fear of the mind's mysteries leads to treatments more terrifying than any wound of steel. In the hush of candlelit chapels and the bustling noise of market lanes, another sort of ailment lurks, one unseen by the eye, untouchable by the surgeon's knife, yet feared all the more for its invisibility. To the medieval mind, the sickness of the mind and spirit is a thing both mystical and monstrous, a riddle tangled with superstition, half wrapped in the whispered dread of demons and curses. Here, where the flesh cannot be cut nor the fever drawn with leeches, medicine turns brutal in other ways, binding fear with iron chains and prayers uttered in trembling hope. At the edge of the market town of Eveshalt stands a low stone house with narrow slits for windows and a single stout door bound with iron. They call it simply the madhouse, though within its walls are kept not only those who rave and scream at phantoms no one else can see, but also the sad and silent souls who stare for days at nothing at all, trapped in a fog that no charm or tincture can lift. Within, the air is chill and sharp with the reek of straw soiled by weeks of confinement. There, on a pallet of rushes near the barred window, sits a young woman named Aelith. Her hair is matted where she has torn at it with restless hands, her eyes wide with sleeplessness. She mutters soft nonsense, scraps of old prayers tangled with names long buried. Each dawn, a monk in a rough wool habit enters her narrow cell, bearing a wooden bowl of thin broth and a small cup of bitter water steeped with valerian and poppy seeds. He urges her to drink, to calm the humors that swirl too violently in her head. She drinks because there is nothing else to do. Each week, Father Crispin, the town's appointed keeper of the mad, visits Aelith's pallet. He believes her plagued by demons that roost in the hollow of her skull, stirring the shadows in her mind. He prays over her in low Latin, thumb pressed to her brow, holy water sprinkled across her tangled hair. But when the prayers fail, and they so often do, he resorts to other means. Iron cuffs at her wrists to still the scratching, bleeding to drain the poison thoughts. A cut at the temple, a scraping of the scalp, to open a path for the foul spirits to flee. Sometimes he applies a heated cup to the crown of her head, drawing the skin up in red blisters that hiss when touched by cold air. Such treatments, harsh though they are thought kinder than leaving the mad to wander the lanes, feared by all who cross their aimless path. Beyond Aelith's cell, in the larger chamber, 3 men sit bound by ropes at ankle and wrist. One chants hymns to saints none can name. Another rocks back and forth, humming snatches of a love song he learned as a boy. The third weeps into his knees, his sobs raw and endless. Each bears the same marks, wrists rubbed raw, scabs at the crook of the elbow where the barber surgeon bled them just days before, in hope that an excess of black bile might drain with the blood. For the wealthy, madness takes on another shape, tucked behind the thick tapestries of noble manors, where families hide those whose minds crack beneath grief or sudden terror. There, in the private chambers of the rich, a learned physician might be called to administer draughts of wormwood or mint steeped in wine, to prescribe days of solitude and prayer. Some nobles bring in traveling flagellants, men who whip themselves bloody in the belief that sin and madness are bound by the same invisible cord. The whipping of the body, they claim, might free the soul that claws against the mind's fragile walls. In the monasteries, the mad are sometimes kept within infirmaries, watched by monks who believe that silence and gentle tending might soothe a tormented mind. They copy verses from the Psalms onto slips of parchment, which they place beneath pillows like charms. Some whisper soft chants by the bedsides of those who wake screaming in the night. But even here, when patience fails, harsher methods emerge: cold baths to shock the mind quiet, binding ropes that chafe the skin raw, relentless fasting to starve the evil from the blood. And yet, in hidden corners of village life, there live those who see the mad with different eyes. The cunning women and hedge witches who understand the herbs that ease restless thoughts. Skullcap for trembling hands, motherwort for those seized by fits, mugwort to stir heavy dreams. They gather at dusk in quiet cottages, mixing tisanes over hearth fires, wrapping the heads of those who mutter and weep in cloths steeped in warm wine and lavender. They speak softly, listen long, hold the hands that tremble. It is a mercy the church does not speak of, quiet, unmarked by Latin words, forgotten by learned men who debate humors and demons by candlelight. Still, fear clings to such hidden care. If a family whispers too loudly that their loved one is visited by a cunning woman instead of the parish priest, gossip can turn cruel as any iron chain. The line between healer and witch flickers thin where madness lives. A sudden death, a new fit of rage, a child frightened by the sight of a mother wailing at shadows. Any spark may light suspicion, and suspicion in this age is a fire easily fed. So the mad linger behind barred doors and iron locks, or they wander the roads in rags, muttering to an uncaring sky, shunned by those who fear the shadow might leap from mind to mind like plague. Here, medieval medicine is at its most helpless, straining to explain what it cannot see, punishing what it cannot cure. And yet, among the chains and cups of scalding iron, there remain brief flickers of compassion. A sister who wipes a brother's brow through the bars, a monk who hums a lullaby as he drips valerian onto cracked lips, a mother who refuses to let her child's mutterings be mistaken for the devil's laugh. In the next part of our quiet wandering, we shall rise from these stone cells and follow the road to the grand universities of medieval Europe, where young men in scholars' robes pore over ancient texts, arguing by candlelight about the mysteries of flesh and spirit, dreaming of a knowledge just beyond reach that might yet tame the cruel truths of medieval healing. In the 10th quiet turning of our tale, let us drift once more to the damp stone corridors and humble hearths where the secrets of medieval healing were whispered like prayers into the shadows. By now you have walked with me through the bitter remedies and the fumbling hands of barber surgeons, through leeching cups and the whispered incantations of midwives. Yet the truth lies deeper still, in the trembling hearts of those who place their fragile bodies into the care of a world so often cruel and confused. Imagine, if you will, a small village tucked against the edge of an ancient forest, where the boughs bend low, heavy with moss and the scent of rain. Here lives an old woman named Britha, her back bent like a bow, her fingers stained green from the herbs she gathers before dawn. To the villagers, she is both feared and needed, for she knows which root eases the burning fevers that sweep through cottages in the chill of winter, and which flower must be chewed to soothe a mother's birth pains. Yet in the eyes of the law and the church, Britha walks a perilous line between healer and heretic. On a night when the wind wails like a hungry wolf, a young man is carried to Britha's hut by his brothers. His name is Osric, a shepherd's son, struck low by a festering wound upon his leg, an angry gash he earned while tending his flock along the thorny bramble banks. His brothers' faces are hollow with worry. They have scraped together a few coins and a handful of salted pork as payment. Britha, without a word, motions them inside. The fire crackles, casting her stooped shadow upon the low, smoke-stained beams. She unwraps the soiled linen from Osric's leg. The sight and smell are enough to churn any stomach. Flesh red and seeping, the wound edged in a dark hue that creeps like spilled ink. In the great cities, A wound like this might be handed over to a barber surgeon armed with his sharp knives and his heated irons, who would carve away rotting flesh with no promise of life at the end of it. But here, far from city walls and learned men, Britha must trust in the old ways, whispered from mother to daughter for generations beyond counting. She washes her hands in a basin of rainwater mixed with lavender and rue, a ritual that has no true knowledge of germs, but some sense, nonetheless, that clean hands are safer than soiled ones. She crushes garlic and onion into a sticky poultice, its scent sharp and raw, and binds it tight against the wound. By the flickering light, she murmurs words that are half prayer, half charm, calling upon the saints and the hidden powers of the forest alike. Osric drifts in and out of fever dreams while the night seeps slowly into dawn. His brothers sit slumped by the fire, eyelids heavy, trusting Britha with more than just their brother's flesh. They trust her with the fragile thread that binds them all to hope. For in these days, when a simple cut can mean death, any glimmer of hope is clutched tightly, no matter how thin or suspect its source. Outside, the world shifts restlessly. In the towns, new laws creep like ivy across old stones, edicts forbidding women like Britha from practicing the craft that was once their birthright. Learned physicians in far-off abbeys scoff at the country healer, branding her a witch when she fails and a liar when she succeeds. Yet the people come all the same. For what else is there when winter coughs fill the air with the rasp of mortality? Britha's eyes grow heavy, yet she watches over Osric like a mother owl perched above her fledgling. In the darkest hours, she stirs from her half-sleep to change his bandages, to press a cool cloth to his brow, to whisper songs from her girlhood when all the world seems softer. Her fingers tremble, for she knows well that the rot inside a man's flesh can outrun any charm or herb. But still, she tries. By the third dawn, Osric's eyes flutter open and fix upon the smoky rafters. He does not speak but breathes, steady, fragile breaths that tell Britha her task is not yet done, but that the tide perhaps has turned. She pours him a broth of nettle and bone, coaxing him to swallow spoonful by spoonful. Outside, his brothers kneel in the cold dew, whispering their thanks to saints whose names they barely recall. In the hush of this simple hut, one sees the naked truth of medieval healing, not a grand display of learned practice, but a desperate dance between death and the scraps of wisdom gleaned from earth and instinct. For every learned surgeon who parades through marble halls with gleaming scalpels, 100 Brithas bend over simple wounds in humble huts, armed with nothing but bitter leaves and fierce devotion. Yet even Britha cannot stop what festers too deep. In another cottage, a mother's breast swells with the heat of an unseen infection, her children watching wide-eyed as the midwife packs it with moldy bread, hoping to draw out the sickness. Some live, some do not. No science yet reveals the tiny enemies that invade wounds and lungs alike, for such knowledge sleeps centuries ahead. Instead, there is only trial and error, only faith and fear, only hands like Britha's that work while the rest of the village dreams. So let us linger here a while longer beside this ancient woman and her patient hut to feel the warmth of her fire against the cold howl beyond her door. In this moment, in this hidden place, we see both the mercy and the cruelty of a world yet blind to the smallest things that decide life or death. And we understand, in the flicker of Britha's candle, how fragile the line was between hope and despair, how easily it could be crossed in silence before the first bird sang at dawn. In this 11th soft chapter, let us drift away from Britha's forest-bound hut and wander toward the crowded lanes of a bustling medieval town, where stone walls press tightly against thatch and timber, and the air hums with the mingled scent of roasting meats, dung, and the acrid smoke of countless hearths. Here, amid the restless murmur of merchants and beggars, another side of medieval healing unfurls, one not whispered in secret, but brandished proudly by men who claim learning as their shield. Picture now a narrow street where a wooden sign creaks above a sturdy door. A basin and a strip of red and white cloth flutter in the breeze, a barber surgeon's mark, known by all. Inside, the floor is littered with straw to soak the blood that spills so freely in this place. A man named Master Edric stands at his table, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, revealing arms corded with muscle from years of sawing, cutting, and binding. His tools lie gleaming on a wooden board. knives of varying lengths, a brass bowl for catching blood, leeches squirming in a jar, cloth strips stiff with old stains. His next patient, a stout merchant named Thurston, has come clutching his belly, bent with pain that will not loosen its grip. Edric listens with practiced nods, though his knowledge is not of hidden humors or the fine anatomy learned in Latin texts, but of experience carved into his memory by 1,000 such cases. He prods Thurston's side, hears the man's hiss of pain, and makes his judgment with the confidence of one who knows that even if he fails, he will not stand alone in blame. Pain and death are familiar companions here. He motions for Thurston to sit on a low stool, the merchant's fine doublet cast aside to keep the silk from bloodstains. The barber surgeon's apprentice, a boy of 12 with quick eyes and a silent mouth, heats an iron poker in the coals until it glows a dull, angry red. Edric wipes his knife on his apron and sets to work, opening a small slit above Thurston's inflamed side. The merchant's groans echo off the close walls, a grim chorus to the hiss of the iron as Edric sears the wound shut, smoke curling into the air, sharp and foul. Such methods are brutal, yet in these narrow streets they are seen as progress, a mark of man's fight against suffering, however crude. Edric learned his craft not from books but from his father, who learned it from his own, each generation passing down tricks of the trade, how to judge a wound by its smell, how deep to cut before one's courage fails, how to tie linen strips so the bleeding might cease before the patient's breath does. When the task is done, Thurston leans, pale and shuddering, against the wall. He will pay Edric in silver coins, a fair price for a service no one else dares attempt. There is no promise of healing, only the rough hope that the poisoned humors might drain away before the wound festers anew. If it does, Edric will try again, and if not, the merchant's family will whisper prayers for his soul and blame not the surgeon but the will of God. Outside the barber surgeon's shop, a different figure watches these happenings with narrowed eyes. A young physician named Brother Alaric, robed in the somber black of a university man. He holds his leather satchel close, filled with parchment and vials of dried powders, symbols of his claim to a higher calling. To Brother Alaric, men like Edric are little better than butchers, yet even he must admit they serve a purpose where the reach of scholarly medicine ends. Brother Alaric offers a different remedy for those who can afford it. He will write prescriptions in careful Latin, recite the teachings of Galen and Hippocrates, and speak of the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. He believes that illness lies not in wounds alone, but in the imbalance within, and so he prescribes purges, emetics, and bloodletting, not with a butcher's blade, but with a scholar's pride. One evening, the 2 men find themselves summoned to the same bedside. A wealthy widow, pale and trembling, her breath labored by a winter fever that no herb or prayer has eased. Edric brings his knives, ready to open a vein and spill her blood onto fresh straw. Alaric brings his books and vials, ready to mix a draught of wormwood and honey to cool the excess bile that boils within her. They stand together by her bed, the flicker of the rushlight playing over her gaunt face. 2 paths cross, one rough and bloody, born of hands and knives, the other lofty and learned, built on ancient words copied in cold monasteries by candlelight. The widow's sons look from one man to the other, their faith split down the middle, torn between what they know and what they hope. In the end, both men work side by side. Edric opens a vein, letting a dark ribbon of blood spill into a shallow bowl. Alaric holds her hand, murmuring soft words, as if his voice alone might coax the fever to break. They do not speak to each other, yet in this hushed chamber, they are bound by the same truth. They are helpless before the mystery that steals breath from the living. They do what they know, what they were taught, what they hope might work. When dawn comes, the widow breathes more easily, though whether by knife or potion, none can say. Edric wipes his blade clean and pockets his coins. Alaric closes his book, tucks away his ink-stained quill. They depart into the early light, 2 shapes fading into the fog-bound street, their rivalry as old as the wounds they treat. And so it was in countless towns across the medieval world. Barber surgeons and physicians, saints and charlatans, all turning their hands to the endless struggle against a world that knew nothing yet of what truly brought the plague or turned a scratch into a grave. In the narrow alleys and torchlit chambers, the fight went on. Crude, bloody, hopeful, and hopeless all at once. While life and death danced just beyond the reach of their trembling blades and whispered prayers. In this 12th drifting passage, let us slip our thoughts into the hush of a monastery, where stone cloisters echo with the shuffling feet of men who have traded the world's noise for quiet devotion. Here, in thick-walled chambers scented with beeswax and ink, another kind of healer dwells, the learned monk whose wisdom is stitched into parchment and whispered in Latin beneath vaulted arches. Picture Brother Anselm, a man neither young nor old, with ink-stained fingertips and a spine bent from hours stooped over ancient tomes. He wakes before dawn when the bells toll matins, his breath forming pale ghosts in the winter air as he makes his way to the scriptorium. By the dim glow of flickering lamps, he copies not only psalms and prayers, but the precious secrets of healing, the works of Galen, Hippocrates, Avicenna, men whose words crossed mountains and seas to rest here in the hush of stone. Brother Anselm is not a physician in the town's sense. He holds no blade nor basin of leeches, yet the villagers come all the same. They wait at the gatehouse, clutching baskets of eggs or bundles of wool as payment, hoping the monk's counsel will ease a cough, soothe an aching joint, or mend a child's failing strength. Sometimes they are turned away with only a prayer, for the monastery is bound by its rules. But often, Anselm slips through the cloister to meet them at the herb garden, where rows of sage, rosemary, and feverfew cling stubbornly to the frosted soil. This garden is Anselm's quiet sanctuary, a place where the noise of the world falls away. He knows each plant by touch and smell, can name their virtues in Latin and in the rough dialect of the peasants who stand before him, caps in hand, eyes downcast. To the sick child with a hacking cough, he offers a syrup of horehound and honey, telling the mother how to brew it at home over the low coals. To the old woman whose joints throb with the cold, he gives comfrey and nettle, instructing her to boil it into a poultice. Yet for all his learning, Brother Anselm knows the limits of his wisdom. When fever burns too hot, when wounds sink too deep, when the body grows cold, despite every balm and blessing, he closes his book and kneels by the bedside, whispering prayers to saints whose relics lie sealed beneath the altar stones. Sometimes his hands tremble, for he knows too well that no herb nor holy word can halt the black tide that sweeps through flesh and bone. Still, his days are filled with small mercies. A mother's tearful thanks when her child's cough fades. A farmer's grateful nod as he lumbers home, clutching a small cloth pouch of dried chamomile. These moments, fleeting as candlelight, keep Brother Anselm steady at his work, night after night. Within the monastery walls, other brothers toil to preserve what scant knowledge survives the centuries. In the library's cold hush, rows of manuscripts stand guard against forgetfulness, recipes for elixirs and salves, diagrams of bones and veins sketched by trembling hands, records of distant scholars whose names are spoken with reverence. Each copy is a fragile bridge across time, a promise that perhaps someday those who follow will know more than these humble monks ever could. Yet outside these walls, suspicion coils like smoke. To some, a monk with healing herbs is a blessing. To others, he is a threat, meddling in secrets best left to God alone. Whispers drift through the village that the monks hoard knowledge, that they practice arts better buried with the pagans of old. Now and then, a restless rumor will leap from hearth to hearth, claiming that an herb witch hides among the brothers, brewing potions that bend nature to their will. Brother Anselm hears these murmurs but presses on, for he has no wish for praise or fear of blame. His vow binds him to service, even when his salves fail and his prayers echo unanswered in the cold chapel. He finds comfort in the small certainties, the slow unfolding of a rosemary bloom, the soft hush of quills scratching parchment, the simple warmth of a child's hand in his as he murmurs words of comfort. Far beyond the cloister, the world churns with pain and pestilence. Yet here in this pocket of stone and prayer, time moves differently. Seasons pass in a soft cycle of planting, harvesting, drying, and brewing. Knowledge trickles like a thin stream through cracked soil, nourishing, but never enough to quench the deep thirst for true understanding. And so Brother Anselm tends his garden beneath the heavy sky, gathers roots by moonlight when the earth is soft and forgiving, and copies his books by candle flame until his eyes blur with sleep. He dreams, perhaps, that one day these words will find their way into the hands of those who can turn ink into cure, parchment into salvation. But for now, he does what he can in this narrow slice of the world, a lone candle flickering bravely against the vast, unlit dark. In this 13th quiet weaving of our tale, let us follow the thread of medieval healing deeper still, away from the monastery's cloistered calm, and back into the homes where mothers and fathers did what they could when neither barber surgeon nor learned monk could be found. For in truth, most healing in those days rested not in the hands of scholars or men with blades, but in the rough, steady care passed from parent to child, neighbor to neighbor. Imagine now a small timber cottage on the edge of tilled fields, its thatch roof furred with moss, its hearth the warm heart around which life turns. Within, by the flicker of the fire, sits a mother named Elswith, her sleeves rolled and her brow damp with worry. Her youngest daughter, little Willa, lies upon a straw-stuffed mattress, her small body racked by the barking cough that has stolen her sleep these many nights. Elswith has no Latin books to guide her, no jars of leeches or gleaming knives. What she knows she learned at her own mother's knee: the feel of a fevered brow, the sound of a child's breathing when it slips too shallow, the ways to coax comfort from garden and hedgerow. Tonight, her hope rests in the cracked clay pot that simmers gently over the hearth, a thin broth steeped with thyme and honey, a humble remedy to soothe a raw throat and loosen the tightness in her child's chest. She dips a cloth in the warm broth, dabbing it along Willa's lips, whispering a soft lullaby as if the song itself might chase away the sickness. Beside her, a bundle of dried herbs waits: elderflower to bring sweat, peppermint to ease the cough, chamomile to calm the child's fretful dreams. Each leaf was gathered by hand under summer's sun, dried upon the rafters where the smoke keeps mildew at bay, stored in linen sacks with quiet prayers stitched into every knot. As Willa drifts into a fitful sleep, Elswith settles back upon her stool, her eyes tracing the glow of the embers. She remembers the winters of her girlhood, her mother tending her siblings by this same hearth, chanting soft words that were half prayer, half plea, her hands never still as she brewed one bitter tea after another. Many lived, some did not, but the work was the same each time. A mother's hands binding the wounds of a world that offered no mercy. Outside the cottage, the village sleeps, yet through that sleep drifts the same sharp fear. Fear of what illness might steal by dawn, fear of the distant rumors of plague that sometimes creep from town to town like a hungry shadow. Most have never seen a physician's face, nor would they know how to pay him if they did. Instead, they trust in what little they have: hot broth, herbs, the warmth of the hearth, and the steady vigil of those who love them most. When the sickness grows beyond a mother's reach, sometimes a neighbor comes, an old woman who knows which weeds grow in the ditches, who carries a pouch of dried foxglove or a string of garlic bulbs to hang above the door. She will sit by the sickbed through the long night, muttering charms that mingle scraps of forgotten pagan rites with half-remembered saints' names. If the child recovers, she is thanked with a loaf of bread or a mug of ale. If not, she slips away at dawn, her thin shawl trailing in the frost, her steps soft and unspoken. In these cottages, the art of healing is not bold or proud. It is a quiet thread, woven into daily life, unremarkable until it is needed most. When fathers come in from the fields with bruised hands and raw cuts, mothers bathe the wounds in salted water, bind them with strips torn from old linen shifts, and whisper small prayers that the flesh will knit clean before rot sets in. When winter fevers sweep through the children, families gather close, sharing what warmth they can, hoping their bodies are stronger than the chill that seeps beneath door and shutter. Sometimes, folk remedies stray into the realm of the strange and superstitious. Bread crusts laid upon the chest to draw out a cough, spiders wrapped in silk and swallowed whole to cure a fever, charms buried at crossroads to ward off the evil humors that slip unseen into blood and bone. These are the half-remembered echoes of older times, when magic and medicine were sisters in the dark. They rarely help, yet they comfort those who watch helplessly as loved ones struggle for breath. As dawn creeps over the low hills, Elswith feels Willa's brow again. The fever is still there, but softer now, less fierce. She sighs a trembling sigh and leans her head against the rough wall, her eyelids heavy. For now, the small mercies hold the warmth of the hearth, the soft rise and fall of her child's chest, the simple hope that tomorrow might be kinder. In these small homes, this is how most healing lives, threaded through lullabies and broth, through cracked hands and whispered prayers. No gleaming scalpels, no ink-stained manuscripts, only the stubborn will of those who stand watch through the long, uncertain night. It is a quiet fight, mostly unseen, but no less noble for its simplicity. And when the sickness passes, if it passes, life stirs again in the thin light of dawn, another day won, for now, against the endless, waiting dark. In this 14th hush of our journey, let us follow the thread from Ellsworth's humble hearth to the sprawling halls of a noble manor, where healing takes on yet another guise, draped in silks and shadowed by privilege, yet no less frail before the hand of illness. Picture now a great stone hall, banners hanging limp in the stale air, rushes strewn across the flagstones to catch the droppings of hounds that roam beneath long trestle tables. Here lives Lord Ranulph of Harrowmere, a man grown soft with age, yet weighed down by a lifetime of wars and feuds, his name spoken in the shires with both respect and resentment. In his youth, he swung a sword as well as any knight, but now his body betrays him. His joints swollen, his breath short, his stomach a nest of pains that come and go with the changing of the wind. In these high chambers, the sick bed is not stuffed with straw, but layered with linen sheets and fine woolen blankets, yet the suffering upon it is no less sharp. At the foot of Lord Ranulph's bed stands his household physician, a man named Master Theobald, clad in dark robes trimmed with fur, a small silver crucifix glinting at his throat. Theobald is no common barber surgeon. He has studied at Salerno, pored over Latin treatises by guttering candlelight, learned of humors and bile, and the secret channels through which the body's balance might be restored. When Lord Ranulph groans through another sleepless night, Theobald orders the servants to warm poultices of mustard seed and vinegar, to wrap the Lord's swollen joints in strips of linen until the sharp heat drives out the cold humors. When the pain knots tighter, he prescribes a draught of wine steeped with poppy, enough to dull the mind and coax a few hours' restless slumber. Yet beneath these learned prescriptions, fear lingers. For all his training, Theobald knows how slender his power truly is. He watches the Lord's urine by the light of dawn, swirling it in a glass vial to read its clouded secrets, amber or blood-tinged, thick or thin, each telling him little more than the passing whims of nature. He weighs the man's life on balances unseen, how much blood to let, how much bile to purge, when to press the leeches to thin the sluggish humors that gather like silt within an aging body. In the hush of the manor's solar, Lady Eleanora, Ranulph's wife, sits with her embroidery forgotten in her lap. She watches the physician's every move, her heart clutched by a quiet dread that not even the manor's thick walls or storerooms brimming with salted meats can keep at bay. At her command, servants hurry to the kitchens to brew sweet possets of milk and honey, to stir broths rich with marrow and herbs. They send for rare spices, cloves and cinnamon, believing these warm the blood and drive out the chill that gnaws at Ranulph's bones. Sometimes a priest kneels at the Lord's side, whispering Latin prayers while Theobald stands back, folding his ink-stained hands. For what is medicine without the mercy of God, the household murmurs. No matter how learned the physician, no matter how carefully he counts out dried herbs and scribbles his Latin notes, in the end the soul must be righted before the body can rest. Yet among the servants, older voices stir. Some mutter that the learned master does little more than drain their lord's life drop by drop. They recall the old ways, when the wise women came with charms of rosemary and feverfew, when wounds were packed with garlic and honey, when a poultice laid by the hearth did more good than all the sharp brass instruments tucked in Theobald's leather case. But these thoughts stay whispered in kitchens and corners. To speak them aloud in the manor's grand hall would be folly, for Theobald's place is protected by more than learning. It is shielded by the very pride that built these stone walls. One bitter dawn, when frost webs the manor's narrow windows, Lord Ranulph wakes shivering in his sweat-soaked linens. Theobald bends near, feels the trembling pulse beneath the nobleman's papery skin. He prescribes yet more bloodletting, though in his heart a seed of doubt coils tighter. What if it is not excess humors, but hidden rot that gnaws unseen within the Lord's belly? Yet he cannot say so, for to admit ignorance is to forfeit the trust that feeds his livelihood. So he draws the thin blade across Ranulph's forearm, the blood welling sluggishly into a brass bowl. Lady Eleanora turns away, lips pressed tight, a single tear tracing the fine lines at the corner of her eye. She remembers the battles her husband survived, the wounds that should have claimed him long ago yet did not. Now, in this warm bed, surrounded by silk hangings and loyal retainers, the fight is more secret, but no less brutal. When the bloodletting is done, the servants come to wash the sheets, to stoke the hearth higher, to carry away the brass bowl with its dark contents, hidden now from sight, but heavy upon every mind in the chamber. Theobald sits by the dying fire, scratching fresh notes into his ledger, adding this new dawn's observations to the long list of signs and humors. He knows he must appear steady, wise, unmoved, yet in the flicker of the embers, he feels the old truth pressing cold against his ribs, that all his Latin and learning are but thin armor against the mysteries that slip through flesh and bone unchecked. Beyond the manor walls, the wind howls over the bare fields, rattling the shutters as if to remind those within that rank and title mean little when sickness comes to call. For whether a man lies on a straw pallet or a feather bed, the cruel hand of illness knows no courtesy, no fear of status, only the soft pulse beneath the skin, waiting to be stilled. In this 15th gentle unfolding, let us drift away from Lord Ranulph's shadowed chamber and walk the muddy lanes of a bustling market town, where the common folk gather beneath creaking stalls and the low hum of barter weaves through the morning mist. Here, amid the press of bodies and the cries of hawkers selling onions, eels, and rough-woven cloth, another hidden current of medieval healing runs its course, one shaped by rumor, barter, and the fragile trust placed in those who move in the spaces between official knowledge and whispered lore. At the far end of the market square, beneath a faded awning patched with scraps of wool, sits a woman named Agnes Fairthorn. To some, she is the market's quiet helper, the one you visit when the town's barber surgeon is too dear, too rough, or too busy to spare a moment for a poor man's ache. To others, she is little more than a cunning woman, a hedge healer, a seller of false hopes. Yet each market day, her small table is never empty of those who come, coins hidden in sweating palms, shame tucked into lowered gazes. Agnes has no sign to mark her trade, only the warm basket of herbs and dried roots laid before her, the tiny glass vials of pungent oils, the scraps of cloth inked with prayers and charms. Beside her, a battered book rests always within reach, its pages marked with recipes scrawled in a hand long dead. Simple cures for common troubles, a salve for a burn, a tisane for sleepless nights, a powder to settle a belly churning with sour meat. This morning, a mother leans in close, her voice barely more than breath, as she explains her need. Her youngest child, a boy of 4 summers, has woken 3 nights in a row crying with pains in his belly. Agnes listens with patient eyes, her hands moving among her baskets, selecting a twist of dried mint and a scrap of ginger root, wrapped tight in linen. She gives the mother simple words, how to brew it, how to whisper a blessing over the cup, words that ease more than just the body, words that steady a mother's shaking heart. Next comes a farmer, broad-shouldered and sun-browned, limping on a leg swollen and hot beneath the leather of his boot. For him, Agnes does not promise a miracle. She lifts the cloth gently, sniffs the angry wound, sees the red that creeps beyond the edges. She gives him garlic, crushed to a paste, tells him how to bind it tight and to pray the rot draws out. In her chest, a small knot forms, for she knows well that if the poison runs deep, no poultice in her basket will stop its slow, cruel journey through blood and bone. Yet they come to her still, laborers with raw hands cracked from the loom, old women whose joints knot tight in the winter damp, young wives who whisper of monthly pains and children yet to quicken in the womb. For each, Agnes offers what she can, nettle tea for the old bones, pennyroyal for the hidden fears that women share only in the hush between dusk and dawn. Sometimes she slips a charm into a pocket, a tiny bag of dried lavender and salt bound with red thread, a promise of protection in a world that so often gives none. Behind her stall, hidden beneath layers of sackcloth, Agnes keeps her own secrets too. small jars of mold scraped from stale bread, bruised and ground fine, something she learned from her grandmother's grandmother. She does not speak of this openly, for to say one knows that rot can fight rot is to invite suspicion, even danger. So she keeps it for those moments when desperation leaves no room for caution. A deep wound that festers, a child burning with fever when all else has failed. Sometimes the town's learned men glance her way, their eyes narrow beneath stiff felt caps. They mutter that Agnes's stall is a cradle of folly, a threat to honest practice. They would see her fined, perhaps driven out, if the folk did not slip coins into her palm when no one is watching. For as long as there is suffering too small for a surgeon's blade, yet too fierce for prayers alone, there will be a place for Agnes Fairthorn, and all her quiet sisters who bend over herb baskets in muddy lanes. At day's end, when the sun dips behind the timbered roofs and the market slowly empties, Agnes gathers her wares back into her basket, coins wrapped in a square of linen, her shoulders heavy, but her heart held fast by the soft memory of each hand pressed over hers in gratitude. She walks the lane home past flickering doorways, where sickness sometimes waits unseen, where children cough behind shuttered windows, where secrets and small mercies pass from mouth to mouth. In her cottage at the edge of the town, Agnes lights her single candle and places her basket by the hearth. She sets to work drying new leaves for the next market day, crushing roots beneath a smooth stone, muttering to herself the words that linger from the old days, half wisdom, half hope. For she knows that in this world, the line between healer and fool, helper and witch, is drawn not with ink, but with fear and need. And she knows, too, that when the night presses hardest against the town's crooked walls, someone will always find their way to her door, coins hidden in a sleeve, trust folded in a whisper, seeking a balm for the wounds this brutal world leaves behind. In this 16th drifting moment of our tale, let us drift from Agnes Fairthorn's humble stall and travel onward through the winding countryside, where bridle paths twist like ribbons between hedgerows, heavy with bramble and hawthorn. Here, far from the chatter of townsfolk and the wary gaze of learned men, moves a figure whose steps are lighter than rumor, yet whose presence carries the weight of both fear and fragile hope. A wandering bone setter, known by few names yet whispered of in many places. He is called Old Renfred by some, Master Bone by others, though none truly know whence he came, or where he lays his head when dusk slips across the fields. He appears when needed most, summoned by a stable lad sent running through muddy lanes, by a shepherd's boy who heard he might be found at the crossroad where the ancient oak grows crooked toward the moon. No sign marks him, no parchment vouches for his skill. His tools are wrapped in a ragged leather roll, his knowledge bound in the bend and snap of joints, the subtle promise of bone against muscle. Tonight, the sky hangs low and restless as old Renfred walks a path lined with puddles that mirror the last ragged stars. He carries a lantern in one hand, its wick flickering behind greasy glass, his breath forming small clouds that drift behind him like ghosts of the work he leaves in his wake. He is bound for a farmstead, where a lad named Jory waits in a bed of scratchy wool, his arm twisted at a wrong and pitiful angle, the result of a fall from the hayloft that left his father cursing and his mother weeping. Renfred is no healer in the eyes of law or church. No monk's blessing guards his back. No surgeon's guild claims his name. Yet for broken bones, the folk trust him more than any who wear the fine black robes of the universities. For the bone setter's art is old, older than parchment, older than towns. It lives in the memory of touch, the careful listening with fingertips pressed to skin. It speaks through the snap of bone sliding back into place, the dull thud of joints coaxed back to their rightful home. Inside the low-roofed farmhouse, the air hangs thick with worry and the sour tang of stale broth. Jory's mother wrings her apron between her hands as Renfred bends over the boy, humming a low tune to drown out the whimpers that slip between clenched teeth. With the ease of long practice, he unrolls his bundle, strips of clean linen, a slender stick of ash wood, a small pot of grease gone soft by the hearth's lingering heat. He cups Jory's wrist in his big, cracked hands, his thumbs pressing lightly along the swelling, feeling for the shape of what is wrong beneath the bruised skin. Then comes the worst of it, quick and certain. A pull, a sharp twist, a muffled crack that echoes off the wattle and daub walls. The boy cries out once, then goes slack, breath shuddering from his chest. Renfred's brow glistens with sweat, though he barely notices it, his mind fixed on the work of binding. Splints braced tight, linen wound just so, a whispered word to hush the mother's fear. No coin is exchanged tonight. Instead, the farmer presses a wedge of hard cheese into Renfred's hand. A promise of eggs come spring. Perhaps a jug of cider if the lad's arm mends straight. This is payment enough for old Renfred, who cares little for silver, so long as he may fill his belly and warm his bones by a borrowed hearth. For years he has wandered thus, across hamlets and forest edges, from barn to byre, his name traded like a secret among those who live too far from towns for learned men to bother with. When his work is done, he settles by the fire for a time, eyes half closed, as the mother feeds him a bowl of broth, thick with barley. The father sits silent, turning his cap in rough hands, his gratitude a thing unspoken yet felt in the hush that settles over the room. Renfred does not linger long. He knows better than to root himself in any one place. To stay too long invites questions from the wrong folk, questions of licenses and guild dues, of whether a man with no letters and no saintly relic has any right to set what is broken. So before the cockerel can cry the first warning of dawn, old Renfred gathers his bundle, now flecked with the faint scent of the farm's hearth smoke. He lifts the latch and steps once more into the hush of the hedgerow lane, his lantern a bobbing star that slips away beneath the bare limbs of oak and ash. Behind him, the farmhouse quiets. Jory drifts into uneasy sleep, the worst of the pain dulled by weariness and the promise of a mother's watchful care. The father mutters a soft thanks toward the darkness where the bone-setter's lantern fades, and the mother, still trembling, traces her fingers over her boy's bandaged arm, whispering a prayer, half to the saints, half to old Renfred himself, that the bones should knit clean and strong. Such is the bone-setter's life, a path between darkness and dawn, between the grudging nod of a father's thanks and the cold suspicion of town clerks and guildmen who would rather see him gone. Yet where backs twist wrong and limbs snap beneath a horse's kick, there will always be need for hands like his, steady, patient, answering to no master but the silent cry of pain that echoes down the country lanes long after the church bells sleep. In this 17th soft turning of our winding tale, let us pass from the lonely lane where old Renfred's lantern flickered and step instead into the world of childbirth, where life clings to a trembling edge and women alone stand sentinel at the gate between breath and silence. For in these centuries when healing meant knives and fire for men, for women it meant warm water, whispered prayers, and the firm, calm hands of those who had learned their craft, not from books, but from the cradle itself. It is early spring in a village tucked among chalky hills where lambs bleat beneath low eaves, and the first shoots of nettle push bravely through thawing soil. Here, in a timbered cottage half sunken with age, a young woman named Maud lies on her narrow bed, sweat gleaming at her brow, though the night air still bites with a winter's last breath. Her belly, swollen and hard, rises like a small hill beneath the threadbare blanket. Her eyes, wide and dark, flicker to the corner of the room where the midwife sits on a low stool, sleeves rolled, hands folded in her lap, waiting. This is Edith Wren, midwife of 3 parishes, her hair bound in a rough coif, her eyes steady as river stones. She has delivered near every child born within a day's walk of this place, called by worried fathers who gallop through the night, by grandmothers who clutch her hand with cracked knuckles and drag her through rain and snow. She comes when called, always, whether by candlelight or cockcrow, whether the purse offered is fat with coin or empty, but for a promise of butter come summer. No one questions Edith's right to this work, for the world has little else to offer when a babe decides to come. In the manor, the lady of the house may send for a physician if she is grand enough, but even then, it is the midwife who catches the child when the moment comes, her hand steady as the learned man stands useless at the foot of the bed, muttering over charts of stars and humors. In Maud's small cottage, the night stretches on. The pains come and go like waves drawn by a distant moon, building, cresting, breaking against her fragile body. Each time she cries out, and each time Edith leans close, wiping her brow, murmuring soft words that Maud barely hears but clings to nonetheless. Beside them, a small brazier burns, the scent of rosemary and lavender rising through the smoke to mask the iron tang of sweat and fear. Edith hums as she works, a lullaby her mother sang to her as a child, a tune old as the hills, its words lost to time yet heavy with comfort. Between the panes, she checks the babe's position with practiced hands, feeling for the shape of a tiny head, the angle of a shoulder, the slip of a small foot that sometimes turns wrong and brings death slipping in on its silent feet. She knows when to wait and when to coax, when to lift Maud's hips with folded cloth, when to press upon the belly to guide the child's stubborn journey into the world. Hours pass. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, and the soft bleat of sheep carries through the thatch. Maud's mother kneels by the hearth, heating water, fetching clean linen, eyes darting to Edith for each silent sign of hope or dread. A candle gutters low, its wax pooling upon the cracked windowsill. Still, Edith hums. Then at last, a cry. Small, thin, piercing through the hush like a blade of spring light cutting the last frost. Edith lifts the slick, squirming child to her chest, checks its breath, rubs its tiny back until the crying grows fierce enough to banish every ghost that lingered at the door. She lays the newborn upon Maud's trembling belly, binding them together with a scrap of clean linen. The mother weeps, not from pain now, but from the breaking of it, the sudden, unbelievable relief of life where death so easily might have come. Edith tends the afterbirth, binds Maud's thighs with clean cloth, checks the flow of blood with a poultice of ground nettle if needed, murmurs blessings to St. Margaret, the midwife's quiet patron, who holds the birth cord in her sainted hand. She stays until the child's mouth finds its mother's breast, and the hearth's embers sink low to a warm, steady glow. Then she stands, rolls her sleeves back down, washes her hands in the basin by the door. The payment for this night's work is meager. An old hen, half a wheel of hard cheese, a promise of help with the turnip field come planting time. Edith cares little for coin. She carries away what she always does. The soft weight of another life safely caught, another family whole for now in a world so quick to break them apart. By dawn, she will be gone, her sturdy boots carrying her over muddy paths to another cottage, another bed, another cry waiting to split the hush of night. And when her own time comes, as it will for all who keep the gates of life open with their hands, some other woman will stand where she now sits, humming old songs while the wind rattles the eaves, catching breath from the edge of the dark, weaving life from pain and fear into the thin, bright thread that binds this brutal world together. In this 18th soft unfolding of our long and winding telling, let us wander from the hush of Edith's birthing chamber into another corner of the medieval world. A place less gentle, where healing collides with fear and superstition, where the sharp edge of desperation cuts against the darker edge of human suspicion. Here, in the borderlands where belief and dread hold equal sway, we find the shape of the witch, neither holy healer nor holy villain, but forever standing in the flickering space between hope and blame. Picture, if you will, a village pressed tight against the edge of a great tangled wood. By day, the villagers gather timber and clear stony fields, their days filled with honest toil beneath a broad, cold sky. But when dusk falls, shadows slip among the trees, and talk turns to those who dwell where the hedgerows thicken and the paths grow lost beneath bracken and thorn. There, in a crooked hut half swallowed by elder branches, lives a woman named Merwin. Some call her a wise one, a keeper of secrets older than the church steeple that rises white and narrow at the village green. Others call her something darker, a hedge witch, a whisperer of charms, a poisoner of cows and dreams alike. Yet even those who spit the word witch through clenched teeth will find their way to her door when the sickle moon hangs low and trouble knocks too hard at the cottage door. Tonight, trouble comes in the shape of a man, Robert of Larkholt, his cap clutched in work-rough hands, his eyes darting like a startled hare's. His wife lies at home, fevered and raving since Michaelmas, her breath sour with the stink of some unseen rot. The village priest has prayed, the barber has bled her twice till her lips turn blue, and still her eyes roll back in her head as if she sees through the roof beams to some other place. So Robert stands before Merwin's sagging lintel, shifting from foot to foot as though the earth itself might open and swallow him for daring this trespass. At length, he knocks, and the door creaks open to reveal Mirwen herself. A bent woman wrapped in layers of rag and wool, her hair a wild nest of gray that spills from beneath a frayed wimple. Her eyes catch his like twin embers beneath the dark. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of drying herbs, angelica, mugwort, yarrow, bundled along the rafters. Jars line the shelves. Oils cloudy with age, powders ground fine as flour, scraps of parchment inked with signs that no priest would bless. Without asking, Mirwen gestures to a low stool by the hearth, where a single log flickers and hisses. Robert stammers his tale, each word falling heavy in the cramped hush. Mirwen listens, nods once or twice, though her gaze drifts beyond him, as if she peers at the shape of the fever itself, crouched like a crow upon his wife's chest. She asks no price. Such folk never do, not outright. Instead, she sets to work in the flicker of the fire, drawing from her shelves a twist of dried foxglove, a pinch of ground mold, a sliver of beeswax wrapped in linen. She speaks as she mixes, voice low and toneless. Boil this with elder bark and a spoon of honey, let her sip it with dawn's first light, bind her feet in warm rags steeped with vinegar to draw the heat downward. She mutters a charm beneath her breath, words that taste like the old tongue, neither Latin nor the rough speech of the village, but something older still, worn thin by countless tongues and countless nights, much like this one. Robert watches, torn between gratitude and a rising coil of dread. He thinks of the priest's warnings, of devils wearing the skins of kindly women, of cunning folk who steal more than they give. Yet when Mirwen presses the pouch of gathered herbs into his hands, he bows his head all the same. For what is fear beside the raw edge of love for a wife whose breath grows weaker with each passing night? When he leaves, Mirwen sits back upon her stool, the fire's glow dancing over her lined face. She does not smile nor sigh, but closes her eyes for a moment, listening to the wind shiver through the elder branches that claw at her roof. She knows well enough what they call her in the village, knows, too, how swiftly gratitude sours when healing fails, how easily a fever's return becomes her crime, how quickly the hedge witch's door may splinter beneath fists and torches. Yet she keeps at her work. At dawn, she will walk the deep paths into the forest's heart to gather fresh henbane and watermint. She will dry them above her hearth and bind them in tight bundles, ready for the next desperate soul who knocks when no priest's prayer nor surgeon's knife will do. And when the whisper of witch slips once more through the lanes, she will hear it, feel it settle on her shoulders like a rough-spun cloak she cannot take off. For in this brutal age, the line between healer and outcast is as thin as a blade's edge. And for all who live by herbs and hidden words, the price is always the same: to stand alone at the forest's edge, holding out fragile hope with one hand and fending off fear with the other, until the night comes when no one dares knock at all. By the time the 15th century's dusky shadows stretched across the crooked thatch of village rooftops, a quiet sense of unease had woven itself into the very weave of daily life. The people of the age, burdened by toil, yet stubbornly resilient, found themselves caught between ancient superstitions and the whispered promises of a world not yet born. And in the realm of healing, where bones ached and wounds festered unseen beneath coarse linen, that tension weighed most heavily of all. In a dim cottage nestled at the fringe of a damp English woodland, there lived a healer by the name of Oswin. He was neither learned physician nor licensed barber surgeon, but something older, an herbalist of uncertain standing, both trusted and feared. To the villagers who braved the bracken to knock at his door, he was a last hope when the village barber's rusty blade and boiling poultice failed to soothe the fevered brow. Oswin's dwelling smelled always of crushed sage and wormwood. Bunches of dried lavender and rosemary swung gently from his low beams, and on the earthen floor lay a curious clutter of clay pots and worn leather satchels. If one peered closely, one might spy parchment scraps covered in his crabbed script, lists of roots, measures of tincture, little prayers in Latin he had learned by rote, though the true meaning escaped him. It was a bitter March night when a pounding came at Oswin's door, urgency carried on the cold wind that swept the smoke back down his hearth. A boy, breathless and pale, begged him to come quickly. His sister, the child gasped, had fallen from a ladder while gathering brushwood. Her leg bent where no leg should bend, and her cries could be heard clear across the frost-bitten orchard. Without a word, Oswin gathered what he could. Splints carved from elder branches, strips of linen boiled to strip them clean of foul humors, a small stoppered flask of poppy syrup to dull the girl's pain. His cloak, a coarse, mended thing, flapped behind him as he followed the boy into the cold. The cottage they reached belonged to the goodwife Aelith, a woman known for her quiet patience and deep worry lines. She hovered now at her daughter's side, whispering prayers to St. Apollonia, though her trembling hands belied her faith. The child, little more than 12, lay pale as milk upon a straw pallet, her leg grotesquely askew. Oswin knelt without greeting, for courtesies were a luxury time did not allow. He examined the leg, pressing gently here and there, feeling the warmth that spoke of flesh fighting against the bite of cold and infection alike. He murmured soft comforts, though the words were not truly for the child but for himself, to steady hands that must work without tremor. He splinted the limb as best he could with the elder wood, binding it tight with linen strips. The child's cries pierced the chill air, and Aelith wept openly now, yet she did not stop him, for to do nothing was certain ruin. When the splint was bound and the poppy syrup forced past the girl's cracked lips, Oswin sat back on his heels, exhaustion pulling at his bones like lead. He knew, as did Aelith, that the true danger was not the break itself, but what lurked unseen. Corruption of the blood, the creeping rot that no herb or prayer could always banish. For all his dried roots and poultices, Oswin knew he was but a frail bulwark against nature's harsh decree. As dawn crept near and the girl's ragged breathing eased into shallow sleep, Oswin lingered by the dying hearth. He thought of the learned men in distant cities, scholars who spoke in tongues of Greek and Arabic texts, wielding knowledge that might do what his wild plants could not. Yet those physicians lived beyond the reach of Aelith's kin, perched behind monastery walls or at noble courts, seeing only the wealthy who could line their pockets with coin. So the villages clung to men like Oswin, half shaman, half scavenger, guardians of half-remembered remedies handed down through generations. They placed their trust in elder branches and saintly relics, for what else was there to hold back the cold grasp of death? Outside, the morning frost glowed faintly as the first bird stirred. Oswin rose stiffly, gathering his things back into the leather satchel, tools of a trade older than any guild charter, older than the kings who taxed them and the clerics who doubted them. He offered Aelith no promise, only a weary nod and the instruction to keep the fire burning high, to warm broth with wild thyme, and to speak softly to the child so that sleep might stay a while longer. He stepped back into the hush of dawn, feeling the weight of his small triumph pressed against the greater truth, that each wound he bound, each fever he chased away, was but a moment's reprieve from the relentless cycle of hurt and healing, life and the ever-encroaching dark. And yet he would return when next the knock came, drawn by duty, by habit, and by the flickering hope that one day, some scrap of knowledge or secret root might tip the balance. In this way, through the long and lonely nights, healers like Oswin stitched the fragile fabric of medieval life. Their craft was part science, part faith, and wholly shaped by a world that knew little mercy for the weak. And in their whispered prayers and bitter brews, one could hear the echo of an age both brutal and strangely beautiful, an age not yet ready to yield its secrets to the reasoned hands of the modern world. Far from Oswin's woodland cottage, beyond the muddied tracks that stitched hamlets together like fraying thread, the city loomed, a tangle of timbered houses and narrow lanes forever choked with the restless breath of thousands. It was here, among the bustling alleys and echoing church bells, that healing took on a harsher, more formal face. Where Oswin's herbs and whispered charms softened the edge of suffering, within the city's stone walls, pain was often met with steel and fire. In a cramped chamber above a bustling apothecary's shop, young Edwin bent over a rough-hewn table stained with the remnants of countless procedures. His sleeves were rolled high, his hands raw from lye and cold water, for he had apprenticed himself to Master Ansel, a barber surgeon of modest repute but formidable ambition. The shop below teemed with townsfolk seeking powders and tinctures, vials of rosewater for the wealthy, dried foxglove for the desperate, ointments made of lard and beeswax to smear across boils and sores. Edwin had been drawn to this life not by lineage nor inheritance, but by curiosity, an insatiable hunger to know how the body might be mended when its own frailty betrayed it. Yet the more he learned, the more he found himself torn between wonder and horror. For here, beneath the weighty scent of rosemary and camphor, suffering was not soothed by murmured blessings, but silenced with quick blades and hot irons. That morning, as dawn broke gray and clammy over the city, a man was brought up the narrow stair, half carried by two burly carters who smelled of stale ale and sweat. His boot, once fine leather, was sodden with blood. His face, waxy and tight, told of agony he had long since ceased to curse aloud. Master Ansel swept into the chamber behind them, his expression a mask of brisk command. "A crushed foot," he said with a flick of his wrist, examining the ruin beneath the clotted boot. "Caught beneath a cartwheel, I warrant. No saving it now." Edwin's throat tightened as Ansel gestured for his blades, an array of gleaming instruments laid upon a rough linen cloth, saws of various lengths, curved knives, a small iron rod for cautery. Outside these walls, such tools might mark a butcher's trade, yet here they signified something more chilling, a chance at life, bought at the price of unbearable pain. They laid the man upon the table, binding his arms and shoulders to keep him from thrashing. Ansel worked swiftly, sprinkling the wound with a rough powder meant to stave off infection, though Edwin suspected it served more to reassure than to truly protect. Beside the surgeon's tools waited a bowl of warm pitch, its acrid fumes curling into the cold air. As Ansel took up his saw, he muttered a quick Latin prayer, half habit, half armor against what must come. Edwin's task was to steady the man's leg and hold him down when the worst began. He gripped the clammy flesh just above the ruin, feeling the tremors of muscle beneath his fingers. The saw bit into flesh and bone, and the chamber filled with a sound Edwin would never forget, wet and rasping, punctuated by a strangled cry that lodged itself deep within Edwin's chest. Outside, the city stirred oblivious. Merchants haggled over barrels of herring, apprentices swept refuse into gutters, church bells called the faithful to matins. Within these walls, the ancient battle between steel and sickness played out in raw immediacy. When at last the mangled foot came free, Ansel pressed the glowing iron against the stump to sear the blood vessels shut. The scent of burning flesh joined the pitch, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. Edwin, white-faced but resolute, forced himself to watch. If he could not bear witness now, how could he ever hope to master this grim art? When it was done, the man lay silent, drifting in and out of consciousness, his face sheened with sweat and tears. Ansel washed his hands briskly, his manner already shifting to the next concern, a woman downstairs who needed a tooth pulled, a merchant's wife complaining of a swelling behind her ear. To Ansel, each body was a puzzle to be solved, swiftly and profitably, for time was coin and coin was life. Edwin lingered at the table, cleaning the blades with vinegar and linen scraps worn thin from repeated use. He wondered at the cruelty of it all, how this was counted progress, this brutal carving away of diseased flesh. And yet he knew, to do nothing was to let rot creep upward, turning foot to leg and leg to grave. Later, when the chamber had emptied and the tools were stowed in their oiled wraps, Edwin sat alone at the window. He watched the city below, where life moved heedless of the suffering hidden behind shuttered panes. Somewhere out there, monks bent over vellum in candlelit cloisters, translating ancient texts that spoke of humors and bile and bloodletting. Somewhere in another century, perhaps, knowledge would blossom into gentler hands and safer steel. But here and now, healing was an act of violence, harsh, immediate, born of necessity rather than mercy. Edwin closed his eyes against the din of the street and let his thoughts drift back to a time before saws and searing irons, to an imagined place where a healer's touch might mean more than a blade's bite. Yet as sleep tugged at his weary mind, he knew he would rise again at dawn, ready to bind the wounds, wield the steel, and whisper his own prayers into the chill dawn air. Small offerings to an age not yet ready to yield its secrets, nor to ease its merciless grip on flesh and bone. In the hush that followed the rasp of the saw and the hiss of the cauterizing iron, the city seemed to draw its breath once more. It was a place forever stirring, forever aching, a maze of winding lanes, where plague and pox stalked the unwary as surely as footpads and beggars did. And in this restless labyrinth, there existed another breed of healer altogether, one who bore neither blade nor bundle of pungent herbs, but instead carried the authority of the church and the quiet weight of holy relics. Sister Maud belonged to that order, an aging nun whose face bore the fine lines of countless vigils by the bedsides of the stricken. She dwelled within the gray stone walls of St. Agnes Priory, a modest convent tucked behind a weather-beaten gatehouse that few outsiders ever noticed, unless they had reason to approach the rough oak doors. Within those walls, however, lay one of the city's few true places of refuge for the sick and dying, a narrow infirmary ward, with rush-strewn floors and a single row of rough wooden cots, each draped with thin woolen blankets that did little to keep the damp and chill at bay. Each dawn, Maud knelt before the convent's simple altar, where candle flames danced against rough-hewn saints. She whispered her prayers over splintered pews and cold flagstones before turning to her waiting charges. Those poor souls carried in from the streets, abandoned by families too weary, too fearful, or too destitute to tend them at home. They came to her coughing up dark blood, their bellies bloated with unseen swellings, their limbs shivering with fevers that no warm broth could truly chase away. Their eyes, sunken yet pleading, met hers with a fragile hope that clung to her small acts of mercy like ivy clinging to ancient stone. Sister Maud was no physician schooled in the learned halls of Paris or Bologna. She wielded no silvered scalpel, nor did she measure tinctures with a scholar's precision. Her tools were humbler things: linen cloths boiled clean in scalding cauldrons, earthenware bowls of honey and vinegar, rough syrups made of wild herbs, and whispered psalms meant to calm the soul even as the flesh failed. She pressed rosemary-scented poultices to wounds that festered and wept, lanced boils when necessity demanded it, and when all else was spent, she placed a sliver of bone said to be St. Agnes' finger beneath a dying patient's pillow, trusting that where flesh could not be mended, spirit might find ease. One bitter evening, when the winter wind clawed at the convent's shutters and the sky hung low with the threat of sleet, a girl of perhaps 16 was brought to St. Agnes' gate. She had the look of a washerwoman's daughter, hands raw and cracked from endless scrubbing, hair limp with river damp, shoulders stooped from burdens carried too young. Her breath rattled like reeds in the wind, and Sister Maud knew at once that death hovered near, perched invisible at the girl's shoulder. Yet Maud received her with steady hands and a voice soft as candlelight. She guided the child into the ward and laid her gently on a cot farthest from the draught. She brought a bowl of steaming broth, coaxing warmth back into chilled bones, though she knew the thin warmth would not reach where it was most needed. She prayed over the girl's brow, tracing the sign of the cross with fingers that trembled only slightly. Age had made her hands stiff, but her resolve remained steady. Through that long night, Maud sat by the girl's side, whispering scraps of Latin litany and old country rhymes remembered from her mother's hearth. Between prayers, she dripped thin wine and crushed garlic into the girl's cracked mouth, hoping against hope that these simple draughts might drive out the foul humors gnawing at her blood. She dipped cloths in rosemary-infused water and laid them across the fevered brow, brushing away sweat that pooled like dew in the hollows of her collarbone. At dawn, the girl stirred. Her eyes, dull and glassy with fever, flickered open just long enough to catch Maud's lined face in the weak light of a guttering candle. For a fleeting heartbeat, the child's parched lips curled into something like a smile, soft and fleeting, yet enough to root Maud's resolve more firmly in her old bones. Then, as the morning bell tolled prime, the girl's final breath slipped free into the stillness, leaving the rushes silent, but for Maud's murmured prayer for mercy. Outside the infirmary's thick walls, the city paid no heed. Merchants unbarred their stalls, hawkers shouted for coin, and the stench of offal and horse dung rose anew with the day's first warmth. Within St. Agnes, Sister Maud washed the girl's small, wasted body with warm water steeped in marjoram and lavender, binding her hands with a scrap of linen embroidered with a crude cross sewn by some novice in training. She offered the child back to God with the same steady faith she had offered to the living, her whispers drifting into the cold rafters above. Later, as the other nuns gathered for matins in the dim chapel, Maud sat alone in the hush of the ward. She stared at the remaining cots, where the living clung stubbornly to their shreds of breath, some sleeping fitfully, others lost in fever's wild murmurs. She wondered, as she always did, whether her prayers and herbs truly did more than ease the soul's leaving. She wondered what sins might cling to her own flesh for failing to ward off the darkness that so persistently stalked her frail charges. Yet when the chapel bell tolled anew and a small boy limped through the convent's gate, his ankles swollen and bruised from slipping on the frozen cobbles outside the baker's shop, Sister Maud rose without hesitation. She fetched her battered wooden bowl and the cleanest cloths, warmed the poultice with hands stiff but sure, and prayed once more as she worked. Small petitions to saints whose bones lay hidden in relic cases, promises that if she could not banish the ache, she might at least soften its edge. For in this harsh age, when hot irons and razored saws mark the limits of earthly skill, the gentle touch of a nun's hand and the soft murmur of her prayer were sometimes the last mercy a soul could hope to find. And so Sister Maud labored on through the endless nights, a quiet sentinel against the cold creep of death, her faith stitched into every bandage, her whispered psalms weaving through stone halls that knew too well the hush of passing breath. In this way, alongside the barber surgeons and the hedge healers, the humble nuns of forgotten infirmaries bore their part in the brutal story of medieval healing, a fragile balm against the world's roughest wounds. As the century waned and the restless winds of change began to stir across the kingdoms of Europe, a quiet murmur of new learning threaded its way through the heavy cloth of old beliefs. But for most, in the villages, the manors, and the bustling towns that spilled beyond their ancient walls, the brutal truths of medieval healing remained unyielding. Roots, relics, blades, and prayers, each clinging stubbornly to its place in the long, weary battle against pain. In a drafty hall at the heart of a crumbling manor in the Shire of Norfolk, an aging lord lay abbot. His name was Sir Leofric, a man once renowned for his prowess in the saddle and his cunning in the tilt-yard, but whose bones now betrayed him with cruel certainty. An old wound taken in a border skirmish, a deep slash to the thigh long stitched and scarred, had flared anew, an angry, suppurating thing that stole his sleep and his temper alike. Around his great bed, draped with musty tapestries that did little to chase the damp from the stone, gathered the sum of what the age could muster for his relief. His steward had summoned a physician from Cambridge, a learned man in a fur-lined robe who carried with him a leather satchel of glass vials and a folio of yellowed parchment, heavy with Greek and Arabic scribbles none in the manor could read. At his elbow hovered a barber surgeon from the nearby town, his apron already stained with the black smudges of old blood and boiled pitch. Behind them both stood the manor's own goodwife, Mistress Hilda, keeper of the still room and the drying shed, her apron pockets brimming with sprigs of sage, rue, and feverfew. They fussed around the old knight's bed like crows about a carcass. The physician spoke loftily of humors out of balance, of choler and phlegm, of the need to bleed the wound and cleanse the body from within. He prepared a draught of bitter wine laced with crushed wormwood and powdered bone, forcing it between Sir Leofric's clenched teeth while the old man's wife wept quietly by the hearth. The barber surgeon bared the swollen, weeping wound and set to work with his knives, cutting away the dead flesh with grim resolve. The chamber filled with the reek of rot and old sweat. Outside the shuttered windows, spring waited beyond the gray mist, but inside, the world narrowed to a single bed, a single wound, and the small, desperate prayers of all who feared the master's last breath. Mistress Hilda did what she could, brewed infusions of comfrey and elderflower, laid poultices of mashed garlic and yarrow across the raw, angry gash. She muttered half-remembered charms under her breath, old words handed down from a mother's mother when the world had been a little darker still. When the physician frowned at her low chanting, she bowed her head and said nothing, but her hands never ceased their gentle work. Days folded into nights without distinction. The tapestries grew damp with mist, and the manor folk shuffled on soft soles, carrying warm stones and fresh linen. At times, Sir Leofric woke and roared like the soldier he once was, demanding his horse, his sword, his wine. At others, He lay insensible, his breath rattling in the hush. The physician bled him once more, speaking of excess humors that must be released. The surgeon cleaned the wound again, burning its edges with wine and pitch to chase away the creeping corruption. Hilda laid fresh herbs, whispered new prayers, and wept only when no one watched. In the small hours before dawn, one chill morning, Sir Leofric's eyes fluttered open, clear and blue once more, but sunken deep in a skull that seemed suddenly too large for the flesh that clung to it. He took his wife's hand, hers so small in his scarred grip, and in a voice rough as gravel, thanked her for her patience. He asked Hilda for one last taste of honeyed mead, and bade the physician pray for him, though the learned man stumbled over the simple Latin blessing. When the old knight's breath stilled, the hall fell silent, but for the crackle of the hearth. Outside, the first blackbirds called out into the mist, heralding a dawn that would come all the same. Within the manor, the physician packed his vials away, muttering about humors that could not be brought to balance. The barber surgeon washed his blades in scalding wine and wiped his hands on his apron. Mistress Hilda, with eyes red but shoulders square, spread fresh rosemary across the body and bound the old wound with linen one last time, not to heal but to honor what could not be mended. So it was that life slipped away, not for want of care, but for the hard limits of an age that could ease but not cure, that could soothe but not save. In that quiet hall, among stained knives and fading herbs, the truth of medieval healing stood plain. Hope stitched to flesh with rough hands and rougher tools, faith clinging where knowledge faltered, mercy found in the small kindnesses of those who stayed to the bitter end. Outside, the world rolled on. Carts clattered down muddy roads, monks bent over fresh parchment by candlelight, young surgeons sharpened new blades, and in low cottages by the edge of wood and field, hedge healers like Oswin and nuns like Maud murmured prayers that might yet outlast the harshness of steel. In this way, brutal yet tender, the long, troubled art of medieval healing lingered on, holding back the dark, one broken bone and suppurating wound at a time, until a brighter age would finally dare to dream of something gentler.